Chapter 404. Raphael, do you know what we found? As soon as he saw Han Jin's figure, Cain could not help but shout. Jedis was not here, otherwise he would not have shouted in such a tone, which would have irritated Jedis. What did you find? Han Jin asked, even though he already knew the answer. Dragons. More than 20 dragons. Cain's eyes and face were full of joy. Secrets were easy to leak, not to mention that in the later stages, Han Jin no longer cared about protecting the secret, nor could he protect it. For example, when Fabian was in charge of absorbing the dragon's blood, it was impossible for him to do everything by himself. He needed some helpers, some mages and alchemists to ensure the quality of the dragon's blood, and some soldiers to escort it. Therefore, many people knew that Han Jin's ability to improve so quickly must have something to do with the dragon's blood. In fact, they had secretly learned about it. Morrison's and a few others once secretly found Fabian and asked for a bottle of dragon's blood. They shared it and drank it, but they did not feel any effect, so they had to give up in the end. In terms of affiliation, they were all members of the Holy Crown City Force Group. The stronger Han Jin was, the safer they would be, and the brighter their future would be. In terms of personal relationships, Cain, Gibran, and Julia had exchanged their lives for each other, and they were also the first mercenary team to contact Han Jin and the others. After many battles, they had formed a deep friendship. Of course, Cain hoped to see Han Jin improve further. Therefore, Cain was so excited that he almost could not control himself. More than 20 dragons? Really? Han Jin said in surprise. As soon as he said that, Han Jin knew that something was wrong. His reaction was a little pretentious. In fact, it was not that he did not know how to act. The problem was that if he was deceiving his enemies, he would definitely do it perfectly. But if he deliberately deceived his friends, it was a different matter. He could not cross the hurdle in his heart, and there were some flaws in his acting. It's true. Ha! Are you surprised? Cain laughed. Guevara's eyes flashed, but he quickly shifted his gaze elsewhere, as if nothing had happened. Cain would not pay attention to such details, nor would he suspect Han Jin. However, Guevara's observation skills were much sharper than Cain's. This was normal. Guevara's experience was enough to make a legend, but it was filled with tragedy. Cain's experience was considered rich among his peers, but compared to Guevara's, the difference was too great. Han Jin knew something was wrong and hurriedly changed the topic. Where's Jed's? If he hadn't seen Jedis leave, he wouldn't have come out to greet him. If he hadn't seen Jedis leave, he wouldn't have come out to greet him. Even in front of Cain, he would have exposed his flaws. If he faced Jedis directly, perhaps his flaws would be even bigger and more obvious. Moreover, a long time ago, when he had a heart-to-heart talk with Jedis, he had said, "If you don't lie to me, I will never lie to you." If he wanted to ask for Jedis' forgiveness in the future, he would have to avoid contact with Jedis now. Otherwise, it would be difficult for him to gain trust. He took a few nights of light back to the Holy Crown City. Adonis is seriously injured, and Aud is still unconscious. The Vatican needs someone to take charge. Cain replied. Han Jin sighed softly, and his eyes fell on AI Megia. AI Megia had also left with his knight regiment. Moreover, Jedis had asked AI Megia to stay with the Knights of Light at this time, which meant that he wanted to help Han Jin and contribute in this war. However, this made Han Jin feel even more uncomfortable. He walked over and patted AI Megia on the shoulder. "I've heard from you, Lino." After saying this sentence, Han Jin didn't know how to continue. AI Megia was a young general that he valued more, and he also had the opportunity to enter the magic laboratory to train. As for a lie, it was better not to say it so easily. "Sir, I understand. Don't worry about me." AI Megia's eyes were full of anger, but his tone was still very gentle. Even if this didn't happen, the Vatican would still not forgive the sins of the Dragon Field. "But the last time I saw Chazos here, I didn't do anything to make you worry, did I? The Vatican and the Dragon Field? What happened between you two?" Cain asked in surprise. "When Nicholas attacked the mountains of the rising sun, the dragons of the Dragon Field were their main force." AI Megia said lightly. "It's good that you can stay rational." Han Jin said slowly. Hatred is used to destroy the enemy. If the first one to be destroyed is yourself, it's better to choose to forget. Hanjin could only persuade AI Media with this irrelevant truth. I will always remember your teachings in my heart. Amij bowed slightly and said respectfully. Although AI Media looked a little older than Hanjin, and his tone was a little strange, everyone thought it was normal. AI Media was a paladin knight who could stay rational, and Hanjin valued him because of this. When he ran into the guardian of the dragon field, Shazos, he acted as if nothing had happened. After returning, he did not leak any information. He had a quality that most young people lacked, calmness. If it were odd, no one could guarantee that he would cause trouble. Even if he knew that he was no match for Shazos, he could still challenge him on the spot or use harsh diplomatic words to force Hanjin. AI Media was very clear that Hanjin could kill Maxwell, but it did not mean that Hanjin could fight against the Dragon City, let alone make enemies with the Dragon Field and the Dragon City at the same time. That would be suicide. Dismark had been operating in the Holy Crown City for many years, turning the city into a fortress with strong defense. However, compared with the never-setting Sun Mountains where the Vatican was located, it was nothing. If Dismark was like an iron tortoise, then the Vatican, which had been entrenched in the never-setting Sun Mountains for countless years, was like a golden tortoise. But what about a golden tortoise? Nicholas and the Dragon Field joined hands to attack and destroyed all the defenses of the Vatican. It only took a few days for the Vatican to fall. Now, the Vatican had become extremely weak after surviving the disaster, and it was not suitable for them to challenge the Dragon Field, even if Hanjin helped them with all his strength. If they really angered the Dragon Field only needed to send out hundreds of giant dragons to turn the Vatican and the Holy Crown City into the dust of history. In fact, after Shazos learned that Hanjin had made enemies with the Dragon City, he still went to Depew City and Cold Shadow City, according to the original plan, and then went back to the capital of elements to find Grand Duke Solomon. Finally, he decided to come to the Holy Crown City. The existence of the Vatican had a great influence. Hanjin had made enemies with the Dragon City, which was his advantage, but he had a close relationship with the Vatican, which was his disadvantage. The two sides offset each other, and Shazos's impression of him became worse. If he did not realize that Hanjin had unimaginable potential, he would not have come to the Holy Crown City at all. Suddenly, there was a burst of cheers below the God of War. People walked to the side of the ship and looked down. About 40 horses were pulling a giant dragon as big as a hill, and they were slowly approaching the camp. According to the weight of the giant dragon, not to mention 40 horses, even 400 horses might not be able to pull it. However, there were not only a few people around Hanjin, but also thousands of people. As the saying goes, there's strength in numbers. This strength was in a broad sense, not just the strength of people. Cain was the actual commander of the Magic Legion in the Holy Crown City, and he had many water magicians under his command. The magicians took turns to form a thick layer of ice on the ground. Wherever the horse pulled the dragon, the ice would be there. Of course, it was much easier than pulling a heavy object on the ground. If they could put the giant dragon in a space ring, it would be even easier. Unfortunately, such a great artifact had never appeared on the continent. "Let's go, Yelena. Let's go down and have a look," Hanjin said to Yelena. "I have already informed Fabian. Anyway, he has experience in this field." Cain felt a little surprised. Why should they go down? If they waited here, someone would deliver the dragon's blood. Hanjin ignored Cain and released the earth-shrinking spell. Yelena also floated in the air, left the God of War, and chased after Hanjin's back. When Hanjin and Yelena landed near the giant dragon, Fabian had already started to work with his manufacturing team. Seeing Hanjin, the nearby soldiers paused for a moment and then burst into cheers. The cheers became louder and louder, reaching a deafening level, wholeheartedly obeying the strong, even cheering for the strong's progress, grieving for the strong's setbacks, and even forgetting their own existence. This was a kind of slavery engraved deep in the soul. It was a pity that in this chaotic continent, slavery was the only survival strategy for most ordinary people. Otherwise, they would easily lose their right to live. Sometimes, even if the slavery was deep enough, it was still easy to be killed, just like in Radon Town, where Han Jin lived. Everyone would encounter many firsts, and the enlightenment of the first time could often change one's goal, worldview, and so on. Han Jin's present situation was inseparable from his first experience. Radon Town was burned down, and the mayor of Radon Town, Manhanna, was hacked to death in public. Human life was so cheap. For a period of time, Han Jin hated Manhanna very much, because Manhanna deliberately made things difficult for Raphael. Because of Manhanna's example, other townspeople dared to vent their dissatisfaction with the nobles on the two degraded master and servant. Now that he thought about it, although Manhanna was bad, he was honest. At least, he did not secretly send people to kill Raphael. However, some other higher-ranked people killed Manhanna on the spot, as if they were crushing an ant. There is no need to blame the slavery of ordinary people. The so-called survival strategy meant that without slavery, they would have died long ago. Slavery was born in a high-pressure and chaotic environment from the beginning to the end. In fact, not only ordinary people always felt suffocating pressure, but also those powerful people, because there was always someone stronger than them. This world was a chaotic one, full of pressure for survival. Most of the high-ranking people ruled the territory by means of iron and blood, except for Han Jin. When they first met the Red Vanguards, Gibran, Cain, Julia, and the others were all quite strong. If they joined a lord, they would definitely be put in an important position. However, many high-ranking mercenaries chose to stay in isolated Cliff City for no other reason than the difference in the nature of the pressure to survive. The pressure to survive in isolated Cliff City was simple and straightforward, while the pressure to survive in a lord's territory was complex and heavy. To put it bluntly, in isolated Cliff City, their life and death were in their own hands. At worst, they could control their greed and not take on dangerous missions. However, if they joined another lord, they would gain considerable power and influence, but their life and death would not be in their own hands. If their strength improved too quickly, they could become a threat to the lord. If their strength improved too slowly, they would be ignored. Even if they did everything perfectly, who could guarantee that they would not become a pawn of the lord? But by Han Jin's side, no one could feel the pressure from Han Jin. It was proven that Han Jin never let his friends sacrifice themselves. On the contrary, he always took the dangerous burden on himself. So, Gibran, Cain, and Julia came. So, Winston and Saxon came. Dwight Steele of the Dragon Singer mercenary group also wanted to come. But Han Jin felt that the Dragon Singer mercenary group's departure left the strength of isolated Cliff City too weak. So he asked Dwight Steele to stay in isolated Cliff City for a while. There were also many others. Guevara came, Jedis and Dominique stayed, Hogan changed from betrayal to loyalty, Alexander, Majordomo Gale, and so on. It could be said that when Grand Duke Solomon was as young as Han Jin, he would never have been as outstanding as Han Jin. However, Han Jin, who was focused on cultivation, didn't realize why all the strong people he came into contact with were willing to stay on the god of war and by his side. Sometimes, Han Jin's thinking was very simple. Of course, he wouldn't easily trust anyone. He would slowly think about it, and when he thought that this person was really good to everyone, he would accept them, truly accept them. As for protecting them, that was just his duty. He never thought that there was anything to be proud of. Fabian heard the cheers of the soldiers and turned his head to see Han Jin. He hurriedly came over with a smile. "Go do your work." Han Jin smiled and waved his hand. "Sir, Miss Yelena, Sir Guevara, I'll be going then." Fabian bowed and ran back. He finally understood Han Jin's preference. Instead of saying 1,000 words of flattery, it was better to do one thing well. Han Jin didn't even care about other people's attitudes. He only cared about his or her actions. When Han Jin heard the words Sir Guevara, he couldn't help but be stunned. He pulled Yelena and ran down to avoid Guevara. He could feel that Guevara was suspicious. Turning around, he saw Guevara striding over. Han Jin sighed in his heart. He gently put his hand on Yelena and put on a very affectionate posture. He then asked, "Why are you here?" Hanjin's subtext was very obvious. "Look, I'm being intimate with Yelena. Don't disturb us, okay? Don't you think you should explain to me?" Guevara said faintly, as if he didn't see anything. "Explain what?" Hanjin weighed in his heart. Anyway, this sentence wasn't a lie. He was just pretending to be stupid. The battlefield is in chaos. There are giant dragons from Dragon City, giant dragons from Dragon City, giant dragons from Dragon's Realm, and also orcs and behemoths. Even the dead bodies of elves have appeared. How could they be together? Guevara said slowly, "This is ridiculous." At first, I couldn't understand it, but then I remembered that you had been practicing in isolation for a few days. Yesterday, after dinner, you disappeared without a trace. I think you should give me an explanation. Almost all the forces are involved in the battle. I don't believe that you're not involved. This. Hanjin hesitated. Yelena gently touched Hanjin's waist. She felt that she would have to tell Guevara sooner or later, so she might as well tell him now. Guevara's observation was so sharp that he immediately caught this movement. Thinking about it, with Yelena's curiosity, she should also be curious about this topic. At this moment, he didn't see any desire to ask. He immediately made a judgment in his heart and said, "You don't want to tell me? Okay, Yelena, come with me." Okay, Yelena answered obediently. She knew the relationship between Hanjin and Guevara. These two people were no longer friends, but elders and juniors who were related by blood. In the future, when she and Hanjin held their wedding, Guevara would be the only person qualified to host it. In other words, she was half a daughter-in-law to Guevara. Of course, she had to listen to him. Hanjin couldn't help but smile bitterly. With Yelena's scheming, she would probably tell him everything in a few words. He hesitated for a moment and sighed. "Yelena, bring Mr. Guevara to my magic laboratory." "You have a magic laboratory? Where is it?" Guevara was stunned. "It's on the God of War. Come with me," Yelena said with a smile. "You're not going?" Guevara asked. "Yelena can give you an explanation." Hanjin was a little helpless. What he said to Yelena was the truth. Although he had schemed against Jed's Vatican for various benefits, he couldn't help but feel guilty. It would be too embarrassing for him to explain how he schemed against Jed's, so he might as well let Yelena do it. "Wait for me here. Don't leave," Guevara said. "Understood." Hanjin shrugged his shoulders. If an outsider were to overhear their conversation, they would never believe that Hanjin was the real Lord. In fact, as Hanjin's strength grew, Guevara's role in the Lord's mansion had gradually decreased. However, the relationship between the two of them was not based on their strength. Perhaps this was what attracted Guevara the most. He could find a feeling here, as if he was facing a younger generation who needed guidance and help. If Guevara didn't let him leave, then he really couldn't leave. He didn't want to anger Guevara. Although Guevara's body had been taken care of, it was still not very good. One day, when he really reached the peak, he hoped that this old man could live until that day and cheer for him. Kane's mages were already dispersing the surrounding soldiers, while Fabian was thawing the giant dragon. Because the effect of the dragon's blood evaporated quickly, they had to finish the work as soon as possible. Not long after, Guevara and Yelena hurried over. At this moment, Guevara's face was very strange. His white beard was fluttering even though there was no wind, and his eyes were shining brightly. When he saw Hanjin, he couldn't wait to ask, "Tell me, what did you get?" "A lot. Get to the point." "Huh." Hanjin laughed. "I want to talk about the magic laboratory. I won the trust of the Dragon Realm and Dragon City. Forza is dead, and the orcs lost more than 20 behemoths. Their strength has been greatly reduced. Amjula and Prudence are also dying. Galbin can completely control the elves. I believe that in the future, the elves will be our trustworthy comrades. Is this enough?" Guevara was silent for a long time and let out a long sigh. Chapter 405. The name Raphael had become a curse. Even Forza would have a headache if he was an enemy, but if he was a friend, he would become a guarantee of safety. Now, the elves had finally walked out of the shadow of this curse. The whole camp was filled with a festive atmosphere because they had heard the news that Raphael would come to visit the elves today. Since the orcs had betrayed the covenant, the elves had been living under heavy pressure. They could not see their own future, only death and destruction. Raphael's public visit was of great significance. If they could become friends with this powerful lord, they would no longer have to be afraid of external threats. Many elves hated the orcs and did not believe in them. Therefore, although the Senate had made the final decision, Lydia still had a lot of room to move. However, no one doubted this powerful lord. There were many reasons, and the most important one was, of course, the existence of Sunir. Moreover, Lydia had intentionally or unintentionally revealed the secret that Raphael had secretly visited the elves and got along very well with Galbin. For the elves, this news was normal. Galbin was Sunir's brother. How could they not get along well? Almost every elf was smiling. They knew that the days of suffering were over. Only Galbin couldn't smile. At this moment, he was anxiously searching the campsite. Of course, the anxiousness here was only referring to his mood. He wouldn't let anyone see through his expression. Lydia, Julia, and Constance were walking towards him. Seeing Galbin hurriedly turn around, Lydia asked curiously, "Galbin, what are you doing?" Galbin looked around and saw that there were no other elves. He whispered, "Have you seen Sunir?" "Yes." Lydia also whispered. She went to the south of the camp. "She seems to be in a bad mood." They greeted her, but she just nodded to us. She didn't even say anything. She just walked past us. How could she be in a good mood? Julia sighed softly. "I'll go talk to her." Galbin's expression darkened. "Lydia, Raphael will be here soon. You guys find Blanche and go greet her. I'll be back as soon as possible." Sunir was the only person missing from today's banquet. Otherwise, rumors would definitely spread among the elves. "All right," Lydia nodded. On the hillside in the south of the camp, Sunir was sitting there quietly. Her slender body was curled up into a ball, with her hands in front of her knees. Her back was stooped, and her pretty face was buried between her knees. The lonely figure of her back looked particularly sad. No matter how strong Sunir was, she still had her limits. Rocks were hard enough, but if an external force was too strong, the rocks would crumble and shatter. Nothing was absolute in this world. Everything was relative. Her heart was full of bitterness, but she couldn't find anyone to talk to. It was a joyous occasion to see her own brother, but who knew that not long after, her brother would reveal a cruel truth that almost tore her heart apart. For the past few days, Sunir couldn't fall asleep. During the day, she tried her best to act normal. At night, she would hide in her tent or find a quiet place outside to think about her troubles alone. She couldn't tell Galbin. One reason was that although Galbin was her brother, they hadn't seen each other for a few decades, so he felt like a stranger. She wasn't used to opening her heart to a stranger, even though they were related by blood. Another reason was that Galbin had become the leader of the army and religion. He was busy from morning to night every day. Sunir was strong, or rather, she kept telling herself to be strong. She couldn't let her personal matters affect the grand plan of the elves. Galbin's eyes were very sharp. He noticed Sunir's figure from afar. He quickly walked towards Sunir, but Sunir had completely lost her alertness. She didn't even realize that someone was approaching. When he was less than 10 meters away from Sunir, Galbin wanted to greet her. However, at this moment, Sunir's figure overlapped with another familiar figure. Galbin felt his heart twitch violently. Waves of tearing pain almost made it difficult for him to breathe. When he left Wild Willow City, was she also like this? History was always so similar. Back then, Galbin left in anger because of the violent interference of the Senate, leaving behind the lonely and despairing Hazel. What about now? Would his only family member also sink in pain? Was this Hazel's curse? Or was it karma? Galbin calmed his emotions and said, "Sunir." Sunir's figure trembled. She paused for a moment before slowly turning around. She smiled and said, "Brother, why are you here?" Galbin could see that although Sunir's smile was still as beautiful and impeccable, her eyes were filled with a kind of withering gray. His heart ached even more. He slowly said, "He's almost here." Sunir knew who Galbin was referring to. She couldn't help but close her eyes and whisper, "Brother, today, I'm not feeling well." "Sunir, listen to me." Galbin sighed. "You didn't do anything wrong, so there's no need to be afraid. If you have to be afraid, then it's him." Galbin couldn't continue. Sunir wasn't wrong, but was Hanjin wrong? "This isn't a matter of whether I'm afraid or not." Sunir's gaze fell on Gao Bin's face. She stared into Gao Bin's eyes. "Brother, must I go see him? For the elven race?" "No." Sunir's words were a little harsh. Gao Bin smiled bitterly. "At least you have to give yourself and him a chance." While Sunir and Gao Bin were talking, the god of war had already landed beside the elven camp. Lydia, Blanche, Julia, Constance, and the other elves who were familiar with Hanjin came out of the camp to welcome him. There were also various tribe leaders and some elders from the United Senate. The god of war was already huge in the air. When it landed on the ground, it gave the elves an even stronger visual impact. Those elves who had never seen the god of war before secretly clicked their tongues in amazement. As for those elves who knew about the origins of the god of war, they flaunted their knowledge. Very quickly, the majority of the elves knew that such a huge god of war was actually a magic tool. Furthermore, it was personally made by Lord Raphael. Hanjin was the first to land. Lydia took a few steps forward and smiled. "You're here." Hanjin nodded and glanced behind Lydia. He smiled and said, "What a grand welcoming ceremony. We're all family. You don't have to be so formal." Previously, the elders and patriarchs had only heard that Hanjin and Galbin got along well, and Hanjin's family had provided clear evidence of this. Even some patriarchs, who had been grieving for Updura and Prudence, rejoiced in their hearts. They knew that if Updura and Prudence were here, the relationship between the two sides would never be so friendly. "Julia, did you miss me?" A loud voice sounded. It was Moxink, who was the second one to jump down from the roof. "Get lost." Julia pretended to be angry. Some of the tribe leaders and elders looked at each other. They never thought that something bad would happen to Julia. How could she use vulgarities to insult a guest? Although the other party's words were not pleasant to the ears, and there was a hint of flirting, it would be over soon. What was the point of doing this? They did not understand the relationship between Julia and Hanjin and the others. Whether it was Julia who was flirted with or Morrison's who was scolded, no one took it seriously. "You're wrong. Julia will definitely miss you, but not us," Leger said with a smile. "Then who is she thinking of?" Sasu asked from the back. "Yeah, who is she thinking of?" Morrison's also asked loudly. However, Sasu's expression and tone were just right, as if he really did not understand. Morrison's words were so pretentious that they could float 50 kilometers away. Julia's face was slightly red. She no longer paid attention to these fellows. Her gaze drifted upwards as if she was looking for something. "Stop looking. He's not here, he—" Morrison's laughed. "He's not here." Julia was stunned. "Yeah," Leger and Sasu said at the same time. Julia's expression changed. She looked at Hanjin with dissatisfaction. The battleship was so big that it would not care about having one more person. If he really did not come, then it must be Hanjin's intention. "What's wrong?" Hanjin asked in surprise. "You?" Julia was anxious and angry. She did not believe that Hanjin really did not understand. However, the anxiety and disappointment in her heart made her lose her rationality. Julia simply said it out loud. "Where's Gibran?" "He has something to do, so he stayed in the Holy Crown City," Hanjin said softly. Julia's mood suddenly fell. She and Gibran were in the honeymoon period and had always been inseparable. This time, for the sake of her people, she resolutely left Gibran and returned to the elves to participate in the battle. She had not seen Gibran for dozens of days, and she missed him so much. Knowing that Gibran did not come, her disappointment was imaginable. But Hanjin thought for a while, "Julia, you know that I have a lot of magical spells. If you really want to see Gibran, I can release a spell and summon him from the Holy Crown City." Summon? Julia was stunned. Was Gibran a magical beast? How could he summon him? Julia wasn't the only one. The patriarchs and elders around her were also full of anticipation. Things in this world were always so strange. If they had known that Han Jin was going to release magic here a few days ago, they would definitely have fled in all directions. But now, they were all waiting with an admiring attitude. Do you really want to see Gibran? Han Jin asked. Yes. Julia didn't know whether it was because she wanted to see Han Jin's magic or because she really wanted to see Gibran, but she answered quickly. Okay. Han Jin also responded quickly, and then took a deep breath. The elves around opened their eyes wide, for fear that they would miss a good show. Oma and I Pami hum. Han Jin sang a spell that others couldn't understand, especially the last word, Oem, which was majestic and long, with the momentum to swallow mountains and rivers. Then he waved his hand, come. The next moment, Gibran's figure appeared on the side of the ship. His face was full of helplessness, and then he turned over and jumped off the ship. What a powerful spell! Julia was so angry that she raised her eyebrows and said in a sarcastic tone, Gibran, you were summoned from the Holy Crown City just like that? At this point, Julia of course realized that she had been fooled, and they had all fooled her. The most unforgivable thing was that Gibran actually cooperated with them. What kind of bullsh asterisk team magic is this? Gibran muttered in a low voice and observed Julia's face in fear. Julia, don't blame me. They caught me and didn't let me out or talk. Who caught you? Julia said angrily. She didn't believe it at all, because among the young people, Gibran was the strongest except for Han Jin. Guevara was, of course, stronger than Gibran, but would Guevara cooperate with the guys in front of her to make such a low-level joke? A tall figure appeared on the side of the ship and looked down with a smile. It was Dominique. Julia immediately lost her temper. The strength of a Thunder Titan was unquestionable. She didn't hate Gibran now, but felt pity for him. It must be very uncomfortable to be caught by such a pair of giant hands, right? Gibran helplessly spread out his hands. His meaning was obvious. Did you see it? I can't move at all. Lydia had been watching the youngsters fooling around with a smile on her face. The other elves still hadn't figured out whether it was a joke or the effect of magic. Han Jin's magic was famous for not being able to sense any waves. Some said that it was a joke, while others said that it was magic. They were all quietly debating about it. A figure flashed, and Guevara fell from the sky and landed steadily on the ground. Lydia's eyes flashed. Welcome, Master Guevara. She and Guevara were old enemies. In isolated Cliff City, she had even attacked Guevara. However, she didn't want to make a big deal out of it, so she couldn't use magic arrows. In the end, nothing happened. Thank you, Guevara replied lightly. At this time, Blanche stepped forward and said seriously, Master Raphael, thank you. She was thankful for Han Jin's warning. Otherwise, with their defenses, they wouldn't have been able to stop the attack of the orcs. Perhaps, most of the elves would have been killed by the orcs or become their playthings. You're too polite. Han Jin smiled. My mouth is dry after walking all the way here. Blanche was stunned. Han Jin and the others flew here on the God of War, and the ship naturally had a lot of supplies. Happy to be dry. She thought quickly and suddenly remembered the first time she saw Han Jin. Han Jin had asked her for water. She couldn't help but cover her mouth with her hand and chuckle. Moon spring water? Don't worry, you have it. Dominique also jumped to the ground, followed by Stilberg and Miriam. Of course, they couldn't jump off the ship. They would fall to their deaths, so they could only obediently climb down the suspension ladder. Lydia waited for a while. Seeing that there were no more movements from the ship, she knew that there were only so many guests. She bowed and said with a smile, Please follow me. Then she led the way into the camp. Han Jin's eyes followed Lydia's body. His face suddenly became hesitant. He whispered, Morrison's, it's all up to you. Han Jin had planned for 2 whole days for this meeting. He didn't care about what to talk about with the elves. What he was worried about was how to deal with Sunir. For this, he thought of many ways and made all kinds of preparations. You don't trust my acting? Morrison's University said casually. Isn't it just acting dumb? No problem at all. Yes, Leger continued. Morrison's doesn't need to act at all. Just be yourself. Morrison's was stunned, then immediately became angry. He gritted his teeth and said, Leger, You want to fight again, don't you? That's not right, Morrison's. That's not right. Leger said seriously. You don't understand what I'm saying at all. Laughing like an idiot is acting dumb. Do you understand? Under normal circumstances, Morrison's wasn't a match for Leger and Sassu when it came to arguing. This time was no exception, and now wasn't the time to escalate the conflict. He could only glare fiercely at Leger. Han Jin's gaze swept across the room and landed on Stillberg and Miriam. He said softly, Stillberg, Miriam, it's all up to you. At this moment, Han Jin was like an ordinary young man who was troubled by his feelings. Young master, don't worry. Stillberg nodded heavily. His expression was slightly dispirited. Young master, don't worry, Miriam said, her expression even more dispirited. After receiving the mission, Stillberg and Miriam had a long heart-to-heart talk. This kind of talk was very tempering. The content was nothing more than swearing, doubting, swearing again, and doubting again. Miriam didn't know how many times she imagined and talked about the future. If Stillberg did something, she would definitely do something. As the saying went, like master, like servant. This saying was pure nonsense. At least Stillberg had his own principles. Miriam was born poor. To her, the sudden arrival on the god of war was like a paradise to her. However, she didn't lose herself. On the contrary, she worked hard to prove the value of her existence so that others wouldn't look down on her. Han Jin and Stillberg, master and servant, were taken care of by her meticulously. Stillberg, who had tasted hardship, suddenly found such a considerate wife. He would wake up from his dreams with a smile. Whenever he saw something delicious or fun, the first thing he thought of was either Han Jin or Miriam. He couldn't possibly have any other thoughts. This pair of lovebirds was completely tormenting themselves. One was constantly worried and fearful, afraid that her happiness would suddenly disappear. The other wanted to dig out her heart and show it to the other, but she couldn't really do it. Thus, no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't make herself understand. Raphael, who are you relying on? Morrison said unhappily. Huh. Han Jin smiled bitterly. Let's go. Chapter 406. Because this war broke out too suddenly, the elves who were attacked were almost unprepared, and they lost an astronomical amount of resources. In order to cover up his shabbiness, Gao Bin simply moved the location of the banquet to a small lake in the east of the camp. The green grass was luxuriant, and the warm wind was pleasant. Accompanied by the moonlight, the lake water, and the tree stumps and wooden tables, it was a unique scenery. Han Jin and the others took their seats. The tribe leaders and some elven elders also sat down. Not long after, Blanche walked over to Han Jin with an exquisite crystal teapot. She poured a cup for Han Jin and said softly, If it's not enough, I have more. Han Jin had saved so many elves, so of course she wouldn't be stingy. Thank you. Han Jin smiled. He then picked up the teacup and drank it all in one gulp. A refreshing feeling spread in his chest. The lunar water was indeed good stuff. He didn't want to drink the rest and was going to take it away. Blanche walked to the side and took another teapot from an elf. She poured water for Guevara, Morrison's, and the others. However, when she walked to Dominique, she was stunned. She didn't think it through. She didn't expect such a giant to appear. The cup in her hand was pitifully small compared to Dominique's body. With this ratio, let alone drinking water, even alcohol couldn't be drunk like this. I'm not thirsty. Don't bother, Dominique said softly. We didn't think it through enough. Blanche raised her head and wanted to find an elf to exchange for a bigger cup. Then she saw Gao Bin and Sunir slowly walking over one after another. The scene suddenly became quiet. Many elves opened their eyes wide, ready to watch the scene of Han Jin and Sunir meeting. They didn't know that Han Jin had already gone to Wild Willow City. The elders sighed in their hearts. If you knew this day would come, why did you do it in the first place? Gao Bin strode in front of Han Jin and smiled. You're here. He only greeted him and didn't even need to call him by his title. Han Jin nodded, then turned to look at Sunir. However, Sunir did not look back at him. Her head was lowered, and her watery eyes were fixed on the grass. Sunir, come and sit here. Han Jin said with a smile. Sunir's reaction was out of everyone's expectations. It was as if she did not hear Han Jin's words as she kept her head down. She turned around and sat down beside Constance. All the tribe leaders and elders were shocked as they stared at Sunir. Galbin was also surprised. He opened his mouth to say something, but closed it again. He glanced at Han Jin from the corner of his eyes, and a trace of worry appeared in his eyes. Han Jin was no longer the young man he used to be. As the lord of the Holy Crown City, his attitude influenced the likes and dislikes of a group of powerhouses and decided the direction of an entire group. Disrespecting Han Jin was equivalent to disrespecting an entire group, and to the current elven race, it could even lead to a disastrous outcome. Han Jin smiled. His smile was casual, as if he had already expected this situation. He then stood up and took 2 steps before turning back to grab the crystal teapot and cup and strode towards Sunir. He then gave Constance a look, indicating for her to make way for him. Constance had suffered under Han Jin before, and she did not want to affect Han Jin and Sunir. She quickly stood up and moved aside. This is the moon's spring water of the elves. It tastes good. Why don't you have some? Han Jin smiled. Sunir, of course, knew who sat beside her. She could not describe the feeling in her heart. There was bitterness, pain, and a thick sourness. She looked up and turned her eyes away, refusing to look at Han Jin. As she turned her head, she saw a burly man approaching her. Sunir was surprised. Morrisons, why are you here? I miss you, of course I'm here. Morrisons said with a smile. Sasu and Leger also came over and chatted with Sunir. Han Jin's entire plan revolved around one word, love. Sunir was a sentimental elf. She could ignore Han Jin for various reasons, but she would never embarrass her old friends like Morrisons and Sasu in front of so many people. As for Han Jin, he had already mustered up his courage and was prepared to face any difficulties. As expected, Sunir was reluctant to answer Morrisons and the other 2, but her attitude was very passive. She did not say anything, and most of the time, she only nodded or smiled. That was her answer. They were reminiscing in front of everyone, but there were not many topics to talk about, and Sunir was very passive. After a short while, Sasu and Leger ran out of things to say. Only Morrisons continued to talk. Even if Sunir did not respond, he would still laugh and continue talking. Morrison's topics were very broad, but they were all related to one central idea. No matter how far he went, he would always come back to the topic. The so-called central idea was, Sunir, everyone missed you so much. Everyone present could see that there was something strange going on. Even Sunir herself knew it. However, Morrisons was only talking to her. She had no reason to scold Morrisons, and she did not want to do so. In the end, she could only slowly lower her head and no longer respond. Suddenly, she could not hear Morrison's voice anymore. She raised her head and saw Stillberg and Miriam standing in front of her. Sunir's gaze fell on the pair of hands that were tightly clasped together. She said in surprise, "You guys." In order to avoid awkwardness, Galbin had already loudly called for the elves to serve up wine. In fact, he was also a little embarrassed. He had wanted to discuss the next step of the cooperation with Han Jin in front of everyone, but Han Jin was not interested in it. He had run downstairs, leaving an empty seat. Fortunately, Han Jin was there to fill the empty seat. Otherwise, he would not know who to talk to. Sunir's attitude towards Stillberg was very good, especially after she found out that Stillberg and Miriam were married. She even pulled Miriam to her side and whispered something to her. It could be said that Sunir treated all her old friends well, except for Han Jin. She had always ignored Han Jin and refused to acknowledge his existence. However, Sunir did not mind Sunir's attitude and maintained a calm appearance. Gradually, the crowd was divided into a few small circles. Gaup, Bin, Lydia, and the other elves were happily chatting with Guevara. Hatred could not be erased, but it could be temporarily forgotten. In this regard, Guevara was very open-minded. Although he was the loser in the end and tasted the loss of his home and country, that was war. If he and Zagund had succeeded in occupying the Holy Crown City, then the next step would have been to attack Wild Willow City. On the other hand, if he had not sent out his troops, then Dismark and Wild Willow City would not have let him go after defeating Zagund. Some tribal chiefs were respectfully talking to Dominguez. Dominguez's shining silver eyes had already proved her identity. Thunder Titan. It was widely acknowledged that the Thunder Titan's combat power was definitely higher than that of a superior gold dragon. Even if they encountered a golden behemoth, they would still have the strength to fight. Moreover, the Thunder Titan's combat style was very comprehensive. Apart from the fact that they could not fly, they could display great combat power in both long-range and close combat. It could even be said that in the face of a group of Thunder Titans, ordinary combat tactics were completely meaningless. Morrison's Sisu and the others gathered around Sunir again. In another world, there was a saying, remembering the bitterness and thinking of the sweetness. And what they were repeating was nothing more than how happy they were when they were together, and how boring it was without her. Hanjin tried to talk to Sunir several times, but he was always rebuffed. In the end, he fell into silence. Almost everyone in the hall was laughing, and only Hanjin seemed to be very lonely. Blanche wanted to come over and chat with Hanjin for a while. At least, she could not ignore Hanjin too much. However, she knew the purpose of those young people pestering Sunir, so she did not want to disturb them. She could only watch silently from afar. At some point, Hogan brought Little Gold Bolt to the hall. Sunir was, of course, very happy, and Little Gold Bolt was also chirping nonstop. Unfortunately, Magic Beast had limited intelligence, and it could not understand. There was something in the world called forcing a smile. Late at night, the banquet ended without any real progress. Morrison's and the others, who had things on their minds, were all exhausted. Sunir was also tired. She wanted to be alone and not participate in some banquet. After Sunir left the hall, many enthusiastic elves kept passing messages to Morrison's and the others. Sunir went into the tent, and then she came out again, and then she went south. When the elves passed on the message, they would more or less glance at Hanjin. Their purpose was obvious. They were not telling Morrison's, but Hanjin. Raphael, I try my best. Morrison's coughed a few times. Listen, my voice is hoarse. Raphael, actually, all of us together are not as good as you. You should talk to Sunir yourself, Sasu said seriously. But Sunir has been ignoring him, Morrison said. If she doesn't even talk to us, then it's really bad. Since she can talk to us, it means... Leger scratched his head. She still cares about the past. Nonsense. Morrison's finally found an opportunity to attack Leger. Raphael, you have to be mentally prepared. Sasua's face was full of sympathy. Even if you can coax Sunir, you still have to coax Yelena later. So troublesome. You should be like me, alone and free. Disgusting. Leger rolled his eyes. What do you mean? Sasu was stunned. Alone and free? Then why are you still bothering Lorraine? Your words, why do they sound so sour? Sass said, I'm discussing magic with Lorraine. Are you jealous of me? Morrison's eyes shone with excitement. He looked at Leger and then at Sasu. These two had always been in an alliance to deal with him. Now, he finally saw hope. Put this away for me. Hanjin suddenly pointed at the crystal teapot on the wooden table. He had only drunk 2 cups of the moonlight spring water before he couldn't drink anymore. Then, his body shrank into the ground and disappeared without a trace. Where did Raphael go? Morrison's asked. Do you still need to ask? He must have gone to find Sunir, Sasu replied. The elves could see that Hanjin had been treated coldly, so no one came to greet Hanjin. Galbin saw that Hanjin had suddenly disappeared. He hesitated for a moment, then called Lydia over and whispered a few words. Then he stood up and said goodbye to Morrison's and the others, then walked back to the camp. Sunir returned to the hillside. Her mind was in a mess. A serious problem was placed in front of her. The elves had suffered heavy losses. If she wanted to regain peace, she must maintain a good relationship with Hanjin. This also meant that she couldn't fall out with Hanjin. Things were so ridiculous. Back then, Amtel forced her to marry Prudence for the future of the elves. Now, he was forcing her to reconcile with Hanjin for the future of the elves. Of course, Galbin wouldn't force her. He only wanted her to think and decide for herself. but the reality was in front of her. Sunir was very clear about the current situation. However, could it be that her entire life was to be sacrificed for something? Sunir, with her strong personality, hated the feeling of being controlled and manipulated. A figure rose from a place not far away and stood quietly behind Sunir, silently looking at Sunir. Sunir's back trembled. She slowly said, "Did you come to me to hear me apologize for what the elves have done to you? Or do you want to apologize to me?" She had deliberately ignored Hanjin at the banquet because what she wanted to express could only be said by the two of them face to face. She couldn't say it out loud in front of others. She was definitely not throwing a tantrum. So when Hanjin appeared behind her, she took the initiative to speak. Hanjin wanted to say something, but he stopped. He didn't know how to answer. "Do you think it's meaningful?" Sunir continued softly. "I was wrong. It's my fault." Hanjin paused. "But I had no choice." That day, Yelena was already fatally injured, but she still tried to crawl towards me, trying to help me break free from the curse. Sunir, you can't understand how I felt at that time. I will never forget that scene. In fact, Yelena is now dead. If it wasn't for the fact that she signed a contract with the Phoenix, she would have died long ago. I can't let her down no matter what. So, you can let me down? Sunir smiled, but her smile was bleak. Raphael, I suddenly realized that our relationship isn't as deep as we thought. Because you don't understand me at all. What? Hanjin was stunned. Yelena isn't the main point. Although I feel for her. Haha, I can do it without caring. Sunir smiled again. The most painful thing for me is that after more than 2 years of life and death together, why can't I gain your trust? They said that I married Prudence, so would I really marry him? Raphael, if I tell you now that I've decided to give up our past, you have no right to blame me, because you gave it up first. Hanjin was silent. After a while, he said in a low voice, "At that time, I was still very immature. And then, that's it. Actually, I can see that you can't give up our past." Hanjin said softly, "Those days, those experiences, those feelings, they have already been integrated into our blood and can no longer be separated. So, although you didn't want to stay at the banquet and didn't want to talk to others, you forced yourself to not let your friends feel awkward. You also cherish Morrison so much. Can you really forget me?" Sunir's lips suddenly trembled, and tears finally overflowed from her eyes. "Raphael, you are so cruel. How could you say such things to me? You are so cruel." "I'm not cruel. I'm afraid that you won't give me a chance to change." Hanjin sighed, took 2 steps forward, and slowly reached out his hand to wipe the tears on Sunir's cheeks. Sunir turned her head away and turned her sight away from him. "I can't forget you either," Hanjin said in a low voice, "who shared the secret with me, who risked their lives to hunt the bear of earth for me, who was seriously injured and nailed to a tree, but still didn't forget me. If it weren't for you reminding Morrisons, I wouldn't have survived until now. You've already given up." Sunir's tone was indifferent. "Besides, you don't have to thank me. If it weren't for you fighting to the death for everyone, none of us would have survived. I should be the one thanking you. Not bad, not bad. But for some reason, when I hear your words, I feel as if a dagger is stabbing into my chest." Hanjin walked to Sunir's side and slowly crouched down. He stared into Sunir's eyes. "What about you? Are you in as much pain as I am?" "Me? I'm fine." Sunir tried her best to smile, but more tears flowed down her cheeks. "Is that so? It seems that you're much stronger than I am." Hanjin also smiled. "Then continue. Think about it again. What else can hurt me more? Just say it." Sunir stared at Hanjin in a daze, her lips trembling. She wanted to continue, but she didn't know what else to say. "But it's fine if you only target me." Hanjin reached out his hand to wipe the tears off Sunir's face. This time, Sunir didn't avoid it. "The method you should choose is to only hurt me. Sunir, you should learn to protect yourself." The feeling of being touched came too late. Sunir couldn't help but slowly close her eyes. "You can't find it, right? Do you know why?" Hanjin slowly said. "Because our hearts are connected. If I'm in pain, you'll be in pain. If you're happy, I'll be happy. Connected? Are we really connected? Sunir bitterly smiled. Then why are you doubting my feelings? You're doubting my courage. I was wrong. Hanjin once again admitted his mistake. This is also because I was too worried about you. The elves suddenly attacked our bite man, which already made me a little suspicious. Later, I heard from the elven prisoners that you were already married to Prudence. Later, they actually found a fake you to lure me into a trap. Sunir's hands twisted together. What Hanjin said was the truth. The instigator was Anne Pugila, the elves themselves. If the elves didn't suddenly launch an invasion, she and Hanjin wouldn't have misunderstood each other. Chapter 407. In her own tent, Sunir slowly drifted into dreamland. She did not want to sleep, but the sleepless nights for the past few days had exhausted her to the extreme. Besides, Hanjin was here. No matter what kind of attitude she displayed toward Hanjin, there was one thing she could never deny. Hanjin was the first man to open her heart. There was an indescribable feeling. Perhaps seeing this man would make her pain and bitterness sharper, but her heart would not be so empty. Hanjin stood quietly in front of the bed made of tree branches, staring at Sunir. He had been standing there for a very long time. As the saying goes, what one thinks in the day, one dreams at night. It could be seen that Sunir's dreams were not peaceful because her eyebrows would furrow from time to time. A person's heart would always be soft. The so-called toughness was just to protect oneself, to use a layer of hardshell to cover the easily injured areas. It was like a warrior wearing armor. No matter if it was a man or a woman, they all had a weak side. Hanjin finally moved. He slowly walked towards Sunir, reached out his fingertips, and gently stroked Sunir's hair. Then, he bent down and kissed Sunir's furrowed brows. Afterward, he quietly backed away, slowly lifted the curtain, and walked out of the tent. At the same time that Hanjin left, Sunir slowly opened her eyes. In the torment of the illusion in the divine temple, her alertness had become exceptionally sharp. Hanjin did not understand what Sunir had experienced. In fact, the moment his fingertips touched the ends of her hair, Sunir had been startled awake. However, she did not move. She looked at the fluttering curtain, and once again, uncontrollable tears flowed from her eyes. Sunir forcefully turned over, hiding her head in the pillow that emitted the fragrance of grass. She also hid her crying face. Hanjin walked out of the tent and immediately saw Galbin. He smiled. You've been following us all this time, haven't you? Yes. Galbin nodded. I'm not worried about you, but the two of them were speechless. Hanjin thought of Hyro and Galbin's reaction at that time. Little did he know that Galbin was also thinking of Hyro. All right, did Yelena also come with you? Galbin suddenly asked. Yes. Hanjin said. Yelena had already treated the god of war as another home. Just because they were visiting the elves, it was somewhat inappropriate for her to disembark. Why don't I see her? Is it appropriate? Hanjin asked. Galbin sighed and said, I've been admiring your war god for a long time. Can you let me go up and take a look? Of course, if it's too late, it's too late. Hanjin was a little hesitant, and his tone became a little forced. Okay. No matter what, Galbin was still his brother-in-law. Everything that he was doing now, excluding the benefits, was to save his relationship with Sunir. Galbin's influence in this matter was very large. The two of them walked out of the campsite side by side and came to the bottom of the god of war. The ship was brightly lit. Although they had already formed an alliance with the elves, they still had to be on guard against them. After all, everyone had already learned their lesson. There were about a dozen mountain warriors and a dozen magicians standing at the side of the ship, vigilantly observing the surroundings for any movements. Hanjin released the earth-shrinking spell, and his figure disappeared. Then, he reappeared in midair and stepped lightly onto the god of war. Galbin observed Hanjin's movements with interest. Then he jumped up. When he was about to reach the ship, he tapped his foot on the suspension ladder and jumped up again. He floated onto the deck of the ship. Guevara, Dominique, Morrison's, and the others had all returned. They were not used to resting in the elven camp. Like Yelena, they also treated this place as their home. Of course, this included Sunir. When they saw Gao Bin, everyone was shocked. Then, they all turned their eyes to an old man. It was Major Domo Gale. Gao Bin was Sunir's brother. If Sunir was in danger or in trouble, Gao Bin would definitely help her at all costs. Major Domo Gale was undoubtedly Yelena's protector. Gao Bin saw an unfamiliar old man sitting beside Guevara. Looking at his status, he should be at the same level as Guevara. He thought for a moment and smiled. Major Domo Gale, right? Nice to meet you. Major Domo Gale immediately reacted. Morrisons and the others had talked about Gao Bin before. They said that Gao Bin was the elf who looked the least like an elf. If his thick beard grew on a human's face, it would not attract attention at all. However, when it grew on an elf's face, it was somewhat strange. Nice to meet you, Gao Bin. Gao Bin smiled and nodded. He glanced around and said softly, "It seems that we are still missing a friend." It was impossible for Gao Bin to not have any hostility towards Yelena. There was a difference between friends and strangers, and no one could completely give up their selfishness. Therefore, he wanted to see with his own eyes what kind of woman could make Han Jin cherish her so much. Even the slowest Morrisons knew who Gao Bin was talking about. Everyone turned their eyes to Han Jin. Han Jin said softly, "I will go down and look for her." "Come, Gao Bin, sit here," Morrison's University said and patted the chair beside him. Other than Han Jin, Morrison's, Sesu, and Stillbird were the ones who had the deepest relationship with Sunir. Morrison's and Sasu treated Sunir as a friend who had gone through thick and thin together, while Stillbird treated Sunir as his future mistress. Therefore, even though Sunir was in a bad mood, she still reluctantly chatted with these people for a while. Sure, Gao Bin smiled. Perhaps it was because he had stayed in the human world for a long time, but Gao Bin's personality was very straightforward, which was very much in line with Morrison's temperament. Even if it wasn't for Sunir, he would still want to make friends with Gao Bin. In fact, Sasu and Leger also thought that Gao Bin was a good person, but they had a layer of concern. Gao Bin had been an all-powerful person for decades, and he had already activated the Mark of God. He was very powerful, and now he was the leader of the elves. If it wasn't for Han Jin, would such a big person like him think highly of them? Sasu and Leger had their own reservations and didn't want to deliberately make friends with anyone. Morrison's, on the other hand, didn't care so much as long as it was to his liking. At this moment, Han Jin had already arrived at his magic laboratory. Yelena was meditating in the room, which had already turned into a world of lightning. Countless electric arcs were emitting a faint glow, and occasionally a narrow, twisted bolt of lightning would appear and disappear in a flash. Due to the influence of the electric arcs, Yelena looked as if she was wrapped in a storm. Her long hair was fluttering in the wind, and her magic robe was also fluttering without any wind. However, she was already meditating, and her expression was very serene, which was a sharp contrast to her ostentatious appearance. But this wasn't important. What was important was that Yelena was sitting in a cross-legged position, which was absolutely authentic. Of course, this was what Han Jin had taught her. Magic meditation was very similar to cultivation meditation. When all mages enter meditation, they would either sit or stand. They wouldn't sit cross-legged, but would sit in a comfortable armchair so that their bodies could relax and their minds could focus. Mages generally entered meditation in 3 states. One was when they were very energetic, one was when they were a little tired, and the last was when their magic power was exhausted. The first was the main method of cultivation. The second was to enter a state of meditation sleep, and the last was to replenish their magic power. Unlike magic, most cultivators entered meditation by sitting cross-legged. This didn't sound like much, but in fact, sitting cross-legged was very important. Because one had to maintain the balance of one's body, it was very difficult to enter the true state of concentration. Sitting on a chair or lying down to cultivate was even more undesirable. In the cultivation world, sleep was often called the sleeping devil, to the extent that it could be described as a devil. It could be seen that sleep was harmful to the state of concentration, especially for beginners, who had to avoid it by all means. When Han Jin had first started cultivating, his master had repeatedly told him not to sleep while meditating. Of course, doing so would give him high-quality sleep and make him feel more energetic the next day. But once it became a habit, it would be difficult for him to make any progress for the rest of his life. Meditation required the body to relax, but it couldn't be completely relaxed. Sitting cross-legged met these two requirements. Because of their different civilization, although Yelena had seen Han Jin cultivate, she didn't realize the benefits of sitting in that way. On the contrary, she thought it was too weird. But at Han Jin's request, she reluctantly changed her habit. Faint electric arcs flickered at the tip of Yelena's nose. As she breathed, she inhaled and exhaled. At this moment, her body should be full of electric arcs as well. Perhaps because she sensed Han Jin's gaze, Yelena opened her eyes little by little. When she saw Han Jin, she let out a long breath and said softly, "Why are you here? How long have you been meditating?" Han Jin smiled. "Probably." Yelena thought for a moment. "A few hours. Didn't I tell you to rest for a while after half an hour? I don't have anything else to do anyway. Don't blame me. You brought this upon yourself." "What?" Yelena didn't understand. She looked up at Han Jin and saw Han Jin smirk. She hurriedly asked, "What do you mean?" "Nothing." Han Jin walked slowly to Yelena's side. "How do you feel?" "This posture is too tiring," Yelena said coquettishly. "It seems like only 10 minutes have passed, and my legs are sore, numb, and painful." And then I persevered. Yelena raised her head, her face full of pride, as if she was telling Han Jin, "How is it? I'm strong, right?" Yes, very good, very good." Han Jin's smile deepened. "Get up." "Okay," Yelena responded. She straightened her body, but suddenly froze in place, and her expression changed drastically. Yelena wanted to move her legs, but they didn't listen to her at all. In a panic, she touched them with her hands and suddenly felt a very strange tactile sensation. Her fingers could touch her legs, and her fingertips could touch them, but her legs couldn't feel anything, as if she was touching someone else's legs. "Raphael," Yelena suddenly panicked. My legs. What's going on? Have I become disabled?" "But I didn't do anything." Han Jin squatted down and looked at Yelena with a smile. "Who told you not to be obedient? Are you scared now?" Seeing Han Jin smile, Yelena was relieved. She knew that if something really happened to her, Han Jin wouldn't be smiling. "It's okay," Han Jin said. "Have your legs ever been numb before? It's the same principle, but this time it's been numb for too long." As Han Jin spoke, he grabbed Yelena's ankle and broke off one leg. When he went to break the other leg, Yelena suddenly screamed. "No!" Yelena's scream was so ear-piercing that even Han Jin was startled. He looked at Yelena again and saw that her soft little face was twisted into a ball. She was grimacing in pain, and tears were about to flow out. The elegance and serenity she had just now had completely disappeared. Just now, she had moved her body, and Han Jin had forcibly broken off her leg, so the blocked qi and blood had begun to circulate. Yelena felt as if thousands of steel needles were constantly pricking her from her toes to her thighs. It was unbearable. Han Jin cast a few talismans, and a white light disappeared into Yelena's legs. Then, ignoring Yelena's resistance, he grabbed Yelena's toes and began to move them bit by bit. Yelena gritted her teeth and grabbed Han Jin's robe, crying out in pain. After rubbing one leg, he continued to rub the other leg. After a few minutes, Yelena finally recovered a little. However, her tears were also coming out. If it was just the pain, it would be fine, but there was also an unbearable feeling of numbness, which was even more unbearable than the pain. "Is it enough?" Han Jin stood up and stretched out his hand to Yelena. "Come, try to stand up." He didn't mean to make Yelena suffer. She couldn't circulate her qi and blood, so she could only recover slowly. Yelena bit her lips and put her small hand in Han Jin's palm to stand up. Then, with a scream, her body went limp and she fell into Han Jin's arms. Her feet stood on the floor, and the numbness that should have disappeared became intense again. Who asked you to be disobedient? Do you still dare to do it in the future? Hanjin simply bent down and carried Yelena in his arms. You didn't tell me. It would be like this. Yelena felt wronged. Actually, this is nothing. Just grit your teeth, and it'll be over. Hanjin comforted her. Do you know how long I endured the first time I sat like this? How long? A whole day and night. The look in Hanjin's eyes became complicated. At that time, my teacher simply tied my hands and feet with magic. At first, it was a little uncomfortable, but I endured it and it was fine. The real pain came after more than 10 hours. That feeling was simply driving me crazy. Although I couldn't move, it was as if I had run for dozens of miles. I was sweating profusely. When teacher removed the magic and let me regain my freedom, I was like you, no? I was even worse than you. I cried for a long time. Yelena opened her mouth wide and stared blankly at Hanjin. After that, I rested for a day, and then teacher tied my hands and feet again with magic. This time, he forced me to suffer for 3 whole days. He didn't give me food or water. He just made me sit there. Hanjin sighed. Oh my God, Yelena exclaimed. Your teacher is simply inhuman. What did you say? Hanjin pretended to be angry. He knew that Yelena didn't mean it. So, of course, he wouldn't be angry. How would he torture you like this? Yelena was really angry. If Hanjin's teacher was here, perhaps Yelena would have scolded him regardless of everything. Teacher said that my aptitude is not bad, but he doesn't understand my perseverance and perseverance. Therefore, he forced me to pass the first obstacle as quickly as possible because he didn't have much time left. Hanjin smiled. And teacher also said that if you can endure hardships that others can't endure, you can do things that others can't do. After becoming his teacher's disciple, Hanjin would occasionally meet other cultivators who understood his teacher's heritage and would always show jealousy. They didn't know how much Hanjin had endured because of this. Of course, it was his luck to be able to gain his teacher's favor, but luck alone was absolutely not enough. His teacher had always been very satisfied with him. Was it because of his luck and aptitude? No, it was because he was satisfied with his efforts and dedication. Especially when he first started learning, he spent all his time and energy on cultivation. He didn't even forget to read a book while eating. Other cultivators were only interested in his circumstances and deliberately ignored his sweat. Perhaps this was the essential difference between the weak and the strong. I understand, Yelena murmured. What do you understand? Hanjin asked in surprise. I always thought that your strength grew so fast because your aptitude was better than mine, Yelena said very seriously. Now I understand everything. It's just that my luck is better than yours. I didn't suffer much here. Hanjin smiled. His state of mind had reached a certain level, and to start all over again, he just needed energy. Yelena didn't know what here meant, so she only nodded as if she understood. Now try. You should be able to walk, Hanjin said as he gently put Yelena down. As soon as Yelena's toes touched the floor, she immediately frowned. However, Hanjin's unintentional sentiments just now had a strong motivational effect on her. She gritted her teeth and tried to walk little by little. Of course, her hand was still tightly holding on to Hanjin. Hanjin helped Yelena walk around the room a few times, and her movements became faster and faster. He smiled and said, Let's go to the deck. There's an elf waiting for you. An elf? Yelena couldn't help but be stunned. She suddenly thought of Sunir. It's Gaobin, Hanjin said softly. It's okay. You can talk about whatever he's talking about. Raphael, I'll go see him. Okay? Yelena asked with difficulty. You'll have to see him sooner or later. Hanjin's voice was also strained. Last time, Yelena had said that she hoped that he would be happy. He vaguely understood what she meant, but he still couldn't guarantee it. So today, he could use Gaobin to test her. If Yelena agreed to see him, he would be relieved. If she insisted on refusing, it meant that she didn't want to accept only half of Hanjin. You want me to see him? Yelena seemed to be straining even more. This was her test. Yelena wasn't ignorant. If Hanjin wanted her to see Gaobin, then she understood Hanjin's intentions. Chapter 408. Let's go out. Han Jin paused. This is a matter of etiquette. Han Jin forced himself to shift the topic to etiquette, which was somewhat hypocritical. Yelena immediately understood Han Jin's intention. Her eyelids drooped slightly, and after a moment, a smile bloomed at the corner of her mouth. Yelena then said softly, "Okay." She had been preparing for this day for a long time. No matter how she felt, she remembered what she had said to make Han Jin happy. Moreover, the customs of the elves and humans were different. Her mother, Tiffany, had always been her role model. Therefore, although she felt a little disappointed and lost, she could accept this result. The moment Han Jin and Yelena stepped onto the deck, the surroundings gradually became quiet. Gao Bin, whose back was facing the ladder, sensed the change and slowly turned his head, his eyes falling on Yelena. "Gao Bin, let me introduce you. This is Yelena," Han Jin said softly. "Hello." Gao Bin smiled. "Hello." Yelena's eyes were a little panicked. She deliberately avoided Gao Bin's gaze, but after a moment, she bravely raised her head and looked directly at Gao Bin. Gao Bin was not convinced. He didn't believe that there was any woman who could be compared to Sunir. He thought that it was because she was willing to sacrifice herself for Han Jin that made Han Jin feel guilty and finally accepted her. However, the moment he saw Yelena's face, he couldn't help but be stunned. The scrutinizing look in his eyes turned into amazement. Her white, smooth, pure, and flawless skin gave people a feeling that it could be broken by the slightest touch. Her pair of big, curved eyes were clear and bright. Her extremely long eyelashes looked lovely and delicate. Her thin lips were pursed into a line, like an unsheathed sword with a valiant aura. She was a little shorter than Sunir, but her figure was exquisite and delicate. Hidden in her tender beauty was a little bit delicate, which made people feel tender to her. She was very attractive. Even from the perspective of the picky elves, Yelena was a stunning beauty. "Brother, I really admire you." Gao Bin sighed. Gao Bin was a man of character. Because of a series of mistakes made by Impugila and Prudence, all the tragic consequences were caused. What was the truth? Denial and resistance could not change anything. Why should he be as annoying as a fly? He might as well admit it openly. Moreover, if he couldn't do it himself, he didn't have the right to ask others to do it. He couldn't forget the pain and struggle in his heart at that time. Moreover, Yelena's strength, family background, appearance, and her contribution to Han Jin all proved that she was a woman worth cherishing. As soon as Gao Bin's words left his mouth, the atmosphere suddenly became lively. Everyone on the ship secretly breathed a sigh of relief. They were also worried that Gao Bin would deliberately make things difficult for Yelena or even attack her verbally. However, what they feared did not happen. "Gao Bin, come and sit. What's there to talk about with those kids?" Guevara laughed and said, Come, I've admired you for a long time. When I was young, I even learned from your battles. Speaking of which, I really envy you elves. You're still so young, but I'm already old." Morrisons and the others looked at each other. Kid, this title made them very uncomfortable, but they could only listen. On the god of war, only Guevara had the right to take advantage of his seniority. Even Major Domo Gale could not. "Old? I don't think you're old at all." Gao Bin laughed. Of course, he knew that Guevara was returning the favor. He reached out and patted Morrison's shoulder affectionately, then stood up and walked towards Guevara. Yelena looked at Han Jin in surprise. "That's it? Just a greeting?" Han Jin smiled as he held Yelena's hand and sat beside her. In fact, he was also relieved. If Gao Bin was an elf who pestered him endlessly, he would have a huge headache. Because of Sunir, he could not retaliate and could only endure silently. However, if he endured for too long, there would be a huge change in the future due to his state of mind. He did not want that to happen. During the conversation at the banquet, both sides held back and only talked about some trivial matters. At this moment, Gao Bin had already won everyone's favor. This time, the conversation was much more in-depth. The atmosphere at Guevara and Gao Bin's table was the most lively. They talked about the war, various forces, and even Dragon City and Dragon Realm. Guevara and Gao Bin seemed to be very agreeable. In the end, Guevara could not help but sigh. Gao Bin, if you hadn't left Wild Willow City, I would never have cooperated with Zagund. Zagund? I've heard of him. Gao Bin's expression was slightly gloomy. Hazel later worked for Zagund, so when Zagund was mentioned, he would naturally think of Hazel. Dismark is good at defending, but not aggressive enough. Wild Willow City is the same. Although Zagund's style is cruel and extreme, he knows how to be aggressive. He is the only person I can choose to cooperate with. Guevara sighed again. Sigh, this is fate. Don't be dissatisfied. Leger finally found a chance to take revenge. He also did not want to be treated like a child. Now, where is Zagund? Where is Dismark? What about you? Guevara was stunned and glared at Leger. However, he did not refute. In fact, although he was the first person to be eliminated, he could still freely point out the situation here. Zagund and Dismark had already turned into ashes. This may not be a bad thing, Majordomo Gale said with a smile, then lowered his voice. If you and Gao Bin cooperate and defeat Dismark and Zagund, we may not be able to witness the rise of a genius. Genius? Guevara's gaze swept across Hanjin, and he was speechless. Majordomo Gale was right. If he could cooperate with Gao Bin, the surrounding area would have already become their territory. Perhaps there would be a corresponding peace. Then, Hanjin would not have a stage that he could not lack. So accept it. What fate gives us may not be a bad thing. Don't talk to me about this kind of mushy logic. I know it better than you, Guevara said unhappily. Yes, I know you do. Majordomo Gale suddenly thought of something and sighed. But not everyone does. What are you trying to say? Guevara frowned. The Holy See was attacked, and Jed's reaction was a little out of control. Majordomo Gale said in a low voice. He looked a little worried. The important Great Gravity Magic Scroll was obtained by Hanjin from Grand Duke Solomon through him. So, he vaguely understood that all of this was Hanjin's doing. However, he believed in Solomon's judgment. He also believed that Hanjin must have his own reasons for doing this. He would not harm Jeds for no reason. He will understand, Guevara said softly. His expression was as worried as Majordomo Gale's. Understand? Majordomo Gale was stunned and said in surprise, You just said that Jed's reaction was a little out of control. He hinted that Guevara should find a chance to talk to Jeds and persuade him. Who knew that Guevara would say that he would understand? The Holy See was attacked. What was there to understand? Only then did Guevara realize that he had unknowingly revealed a secret. Of course, other than Majordomo Gale, most people would not be able to grasp the real content from just a few words. Majordomo Gale's question was very strange. Guevara could not help but ask in a low voice, You know too? Majordomo Gale nodded. The two of them looked at each other for a moment and smiled. You have to believe in him. Gao Bin put away his habitual cynical smile and said solemnly, He is not a person who would betray his friends. When Gao Bin returned to Wild Willow City, he had always paid attention to Hanjin. He did everything he could to gather information about Hanjin. Later, Sunir came from Wild Willow City to the camp. After a careful conversation, Gao Bin finally understood Hanjin's experience like the back of his hand. Hanjin had faced huge threats several times and fought to the death to protect his friends. Such a person would not deliberately hurt friends that he could trust. The fact that he could build trust with Hanjin in such a short time was directly related to his judgment. You know too? Majordomo Gale and Guevara asked at the same time. Gao Bin was stunned for a moment and nodded silently. The three of them kept looking at each other's faces. It was a very strange feeling to keep a top secret together. It made their relationship and trust each other even more. This kid, Guevara smiled bitterly. Doesn't he know? If something goes wrong, someone will die. When many people knew a secret, it was inevitable that it would be leaked. Even if they could keep their mouths shut, if they were not careful when interacting with Jeds, it was very likely that Jeds would find out. Jeds was definitely not a fool. He should have his own confidence, Majordomo Gale said. When he first came in contact with Hanjin, he was able to figure out Hanjin's situation. He could even determine what Hanjin wanted to do and what he would do. However, Han Jin had been growing at an astonishing speed. Now he could not see anything. He could only guess, or rather trust. He also knew that this kind of trust was more or less blind. However, facing an unfathomable lord, this was his only choice, just like facing Grand Duke Solomon. I know what his confidence is. Guevara chuckled. What is it? Major Domo Gale picked up his teacup as if nothing had happened, as if he did not care about this question. I'm not telling you. Major Domo Gale glanced at Guevara with contempt. He knew that this would be the result, so he acted as if nothing had happened just now to protect his dignity. Do you guys think that the Thunder Titan's hearing is very sharp? Guevara suddenly changed the topic. Major Domo Gale and Gao Bin could not help but look at Dominique. Dominique was sitting by the side of the ship, looking up at the bright night sky with a relaxed expression. She often sat like this, so everyone was already used to it. Probably not as good as us elves, Gao Bin said. Dominique is a beauty. She became a Thunder Titan at such a young age. Her future is limitless. Guevara said, Who do you think she will fall in love with? It won't be Raphael, Major Domo Gale said. It definitely won't be Raphael, Gao Bin added. Major Domo Gale and Gao Bin looked at each other. They both understood what each other meant. Stop messing around. For various reasons, Sunir might accept Yelena, but she would definitely not accept anyone else. When that time came, who knew what would happen? What? Guevara did not seem to understand. Nonsense, Major Domo Gale said impatiently. Dominique is so tall. She's not a good match for Han Jin. Don't forget, the stronger a Thunder Titan is, the shorter their body will be. What do you mean? Major Domo Gale was really angry. Galbin also looked at Guevara with dissatisfaction. On this issue, they had enough reasons to be on the same side. She heard it. Guevara said. Major Domo Gale and Galbin turned their heads to look. Sure enough, the carefree look on Dominguez's face was gone. She looked very embarrassed, and she didn't know where to look. She looked around in panic, and her face was covered with a blush. Dominique, Major Domo Gale shouted. He already understood what Guevara meant. Dominique had most likely heard their conversation. As for whether she understood what they were talking about, only Dominique knew. Domini glared at Major Domo Gale, then suddenly stood up and jumped off the ship. She landed heavily on the ground with a thud, then strode off into the distance. She won't talk nonsense, right? Galbin was a little worried. She won't. Guevara laughed and said, What I said just now was just a joke. You don't have to take it to heart. I know Raphael too well. If it weren't for the sudden attack of the elves and the news that Sunir and Prudence were married, with his relationship with Sunir, he would never accept Yelena. Galbin sighed softly, and Major Domo Gale was a little annoyed. The change in their attitudes was enough to prove that the world was unpredictable. Just now, Major Domo Gale and Galbin were on the same side, but Guevara's words instantly disintegrated their unified camp. However, the one with the best hearing was not Dominique, but Han Jin. When he heard the conversation between Guevara and the others, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He could only pretend that he didn't hear anything. As the night grew darker, the people on the deck returned to their rooms one after another. Yelena once again entered Han Jin's magic lab. In fact, ever since she had been recognized by Han Jin and everyone else, her desire to improve herself had become weaker and weaker. Although she still meditated, read magic books, and entered the lab frequently, compared to her previous efforts, there was still a huge gap between what she had done before. When she was young, she wanted to be praised by her father. This was her biggest motivation. Now, she was satisfied with everything. It was said that a woman's home was the grave of a hero. In fact, a woman's will would also be weakened by happiness. However, Yelena finally knew that Sunir had successfully activated the Mark of God. She had become the third strongest elf after Galbin and Prudence. Although Sunir's combat experience might not be as good as Galbin and Prudence, her strength was undeniable. This news was like a booster to Yelena's confidence. She didn't like fighting, but she would never allow herself to be outdone by Sunir. Han Jin had opened the magic laboratory for her, which gave her enough confidence. Yelena returned to her old days, seizing every minute and second to practice. Gaobin still didn't leave. Hanjin felt that Gaobin seemed to have something to say to him. Since he brought Gaobin onto the God of War, he had to personally send him off. Therefore, he didn't leave and just waited quietly. There were fewer and fewer people on the deck. After Hanjin left, besides the magicians and mountain warriors on night duty, only Hanjin was left. Gaobin left his seat and slowly walked to the opposite side of Hanjin. I've always been clear about public and private matters. Gaobin smiled. But I know. Hanjin also smiled. But I feel that you've separated public and private matters too clearly. Therefore, you can't see things that you should be able to see clearly. What do you mean? Gaobin asked in surprise. Nothing. You'll understand in the future. Hanjin said slowly. He was talking about Lydia. Almost everyone with a certain level of observation could see Lydia's feelings for Gaobin after interacting with Gaobin and Lydia for a period of time. Only Gaobin couldn't see anything. This could only mean that Gaobin had separated public and private matters too clearly. Therefore, he treated Lydia's concern for him, trust for him, and kindness for him as the intimacy between comrades. However, Lydia's face was disfigured and she was ashamed of her inferiority. Therefore, she refused to show her feelings clearly. If no one pointed it out, the two elves would probably remain the same even after 100 years. Why did you only say half of what you wanted to say? Gaobin was very dissatisfied. Can't you say it now? Can't say it, Hanjin said lightly. Why? Gaobin was even more dissatisfied. It's not time yet. Gaobin turned around helplessly and stroked the beard on his chin thoughtfully. He was an elf who was good at reflecting. Unfortunately, after reflecting for a long time, he still couldn't figure out what he should have seen. All right, what did you want to say just now? Hanjin changed the topic. I shouldn't talk about public matters with you here, but I really can't help it. Gaobin sat up straight and said slowly, Where do we start dealing with the orcs? The orcs are still very strong. If we attack now, we will also suffer great losses. Hanjin said, I'm not afraid. Gaobin's tone was full of hatred. This is not a matter of whether you're afraid or not. Since we've already won, why should we pay an unnecessary price? Hanjin thought for a moment. We should have news in 3 to 5 days. 3 to 5 days? So you can't make the decision yourself? Gaobin was shocked, begging for monthly votes. I don't think there will be many votes for me to update at this time. I won't be able to catch up. Let's just treat this as my last struggle. Facts always speak louder than words. Of course, the monthly votes are the most meaningful measuring stick. Looking at the dismal number of subscriptions now, perhaps the only way to survive is to completely follow the mainstream. The outline of this book is about 60,000 words. It's too complete. I can't change the plot. Chapter 409. The morning sun slowly rose from the horizon, spreading its warm sunshine to the world. In a small village about 40 miles away from the Holy Crown City, a man slowly turned his face and looked at the morning sun. His face and forehead were covered with wrinkles, which were different from those of ordinary people. They were deep and dense, as if they were carved by a knife. It could even be said that his face was filled with a kind of unbearable aging. But strangely, his eyes were so young, full of vigor and vitality. Gazing at the morning sun, he suddenly smiled. His smile was also different from that of ordinary people. It was mixed with an indescribable sense of satisfaction. Then, he knelt down on the ground little by little, bowing to the splendid morning sun. The surrounding farmers were whispering to each other. Yesterday, when they finished work, they saw this strange man standing under the tree. This morning, when they came out to farm, they saw this strange man again. It seemed that he had not moved for the whole night. However, this strange man didn't seem to care about other people's gazes. After a while, he stood up little by little, gently shaking off the dust on his body. In fact, his clothes were so shabby that they were even worse than those of a beggar. But his movements were so gentle and elegant, as if he was wearing the most expensive clothes in the world. At this moment, a carriage galloped from the distance. A woman with fiery red hair was whipping the horse in front of her with all her might. The horse pulling the carriage was also whipped hard. Although it was so tired that it was foaming at the mouth, it still galloped with all its might. The road was not smooth, and the red carriage was like a spring that kept bouncing. With the naked eye, one could clearly see that the angle between the wheels and the shaft was severely distorted. It made one worry that the carriage would completely fall apart in the next moment. Behind the carriage, about a dozen people were chasing after it. Their clothes were very mixed. Some were wearing magic robes, some were wearing soft armor, and some were wearing tight clothes. They all seemed to be professionals. Farmer raised their heads and temporarily stopped their farm work. The strange man was also watching them attentively. There was a burst of magic waves, and one of the magicians chanted an incantation. Then, he pointed his magic staff forward, and a meteor wrapped in fire whistled down from the sky. In an instant, the two horses in front of the carriage were smashed into a bloody mess, and a large hole was created in the road. The two horses behind couldn't stop their momentum and rushed straight into the hole. One of the horse's brains burst out on the spot, and the other horse didn't fare much better. Its neck curled up like a snake, and it was obvious that its neck bone had been broken. Then, the carriage also sank, but under the huge impact, the carriage suddenly flipped over. It slowly spun twice in the air and fell heavily on the ground. The red carriage was smashed into pieces, and two people rolled out of it. They rolled along the road for more than 20 meters before they could stabilize themselves. One of them was a woman, and the other was a young man. Both of them had fallen miserably. The young man's head was already broken and bleeding, while the woman's injuries were unclear. However, she kept struggling but couldn't get up. It was obvious that she was also injured. The red-haired woman was much luckier than her companion. She somersaulted a few times in the air and landed in the wheat field that had been plowed by the farmer. Then, she got up quickly and pulled out the giant sword on her back. She screamed, "You guys go, I'll stop them. Go!" The young man struggled to run over and forcefully dragged the woman up from the ground. Then, he staggered forward, shouting as he ran, "Help! Save me! Bandits are robbing!" The young man wanted to call for help, but his shouts had the opposite effect. The farmers immediately scattered and fled back to their own villages. For a normal person to interfere in a battle between professionists was simply courting death. They were all people with families to feed, so no one wanted to joke around with their lives. The people behind had already caught up. They jumped off their horses. The other party had lost the carriage and couldn't escape. "Go!" The red-haired female swordsman roared as she pounced towards the enemy. What was interesting was that the leather armor she wore was also fiery red, making her look like a ball of fire. Her aura was astonishing, but her strength and aura did not match at all. The swordsman at the front pulled out his long sword and faced the incoming fire with a backhand. With a clang, the huge sword in the red-haired female swordsman's hand flew diagonally into the air. Following that, the swordsman flew up and kicked the red-haired female swordsman's chest. The red-haired female swordsman let out a wail as her feet left the ground, and her body flew back 7 to 8 meters before she fell to the ground in exhaustion. The swordsman took a few steps forward, then suddenly turned back and asked, "This is useless, right?" "It's useless," a magician said coldly. "Damn, it's just that time is too tight. Look at this body, it's hot. What a pity." The swordsman shook his head and then raised his sword. The red-haired swordswoman wanted to jump up and continue fighting, but her chest and abdomen were seriously injured. She was in so much pain that she couldn't breathe. Blood kept spurting out from her mouth and nostrils. Not to mention fighting, she couldn't even move her body. The swordsman's sword had already slashed down. At this moment, he suddenly felt a blur in front of his eyes. Then, he saw an old face full of wrinkles. He was shocked and wanted to take a few steps back, but found that his wrist was firmly held. "God gave you a pair of strong arms, not to let you bully others, understand?" The old man said softly, "Now, repent your sins." The swordsman's face changed drastically. He struggled with all his might, but he felt that his wrist was surrounded by an iron band. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't move it. He almost couldn't believe his eyes. Such thin arms actually had so much strength, and the more he tried, the more intense the pain in his wrist became. In the end, he couldn't hold the sword anymore. The sword fell from his hand and fell to the red-haired swordswoman's body. The old man kicked the hilt of the sword with the tip of his foot. The sword let out an ear-piercing shriek and shot toward the magician on the side. The magician had just raised his magic staff when he suddenly saw a cold flash and a strong wind hit him in the face. He had never seen wind become so strong. It was as if he had been punched in the face. He couldn't help but stagger back 7 or 8 steps. When he could open his eyes, he found that the top of the magic staff in his hand had disappeared. He couldn't help but let out a sharp cry. For a magician, a suitable magic staff was equivalent to half their life. In the blink of an eye, half of their life was gone. He couldn't accept this result. The rest of the people were all dumbfounded. Just a moment ago, they had all drawn their weapons and were ready to kill the meddlesome person. Now, everyone had turned into statues. They didn't even dare to move a finger. They knew the strength of their companion. A 9th-grade magician would be universally respected anywhere on the continent. In the end, in just a moment, his weapon was destroyed. What would they do if it were them? Of course, their companion was too careless. He didn't even release a magic shield. But could a magic shield block the sword just now? "Who are you, sir?" someone asked bravely. "I'm just a traveler," the old man said softly. "Sir, they were originally servants of our mercenary group. They colluded to steal our money. We are under the orders of our leader to capture these criminals. We hope that you won't interfere with us," the man said slowly. "Bah!" The red-haired swordswoman spat to show her contempt. However, what she spat out was not saliva, but blood. She was Morrison's childhood playmate, Sylvia. Her natural stubbornness was on full display at this moment. Even if there was no one to help her and she was about to die under the enemy's sword, she would not give in. The 2 people behind her were naturally Chi Li and Little Joseph. When they saw Sylvia being knocked down, they gave up on running away and rushed towards Sylvia. Lying is also a sin. It seems that you need to repent seriously. The old man's face became stern. Then he bent down and waved his hand. A pure white curtain of light fell from the sky and enveloped Sylvia. At this time, Chi Li and Little Joseph had already run back. Seeing this, they did not act rashly. After the white light disappeared, they stood on both sides of Sylvia and helped her up. "You're a priest." The swordsman was shocked. He took a few steps back and slowly moved his wrist. He felt that his wrist bones had been crushed. He could not exert any strength at all. "I've said it before. I'm just a traveler." Those people looked at each other. He didn't look like a priest. In their impression, priests were very particular about appearance. If they didn't give the impression of nobility and holiness, who would be willing to believe in them? The old man in front of them was dressed shabbily. He was worse than a beggar. It was impossible to say that he was a priest. However, this old man's strength was obvious to all. He could be described as unfathomable. At least, they couldn't figure him out. "Sir, do you have to interfere with us?" The sorrowful magician asked slowly. "Then shouldn't you at least tell us your name? This way, we can go back and answer to the leader. With your strength, do you dare not say it?" "My name is Adolf," the old man said calmly. "Adolf? I'll remember it," the magician said hatefully. Then, he glanced at Chi Li and the others like a hungry wolf. Then he waved his hand. "Let's go back." The group of people turned around and walked back. They were about to succeed, but an old man appeared out of nowhere. They were very unhappy, but the situation was beyond their control. In the face of an undefeatable power, they could only retreat. When the group of people jumped on their horses and prepared to retreat, the old man called Adolf suddenly said, "Wait a minute. What else do you want?" The magician turned around and asked angrily. "You haven't repented yet," Adolf said softly. Adolf said softly, "I can see that you are all very violent. You must have done a lot of wrong things in the past. Please believe me, God will only save you if you sincerely repent. Otherwise, you will fall into hell sooner or later." "Repentance my ass." The magician was furious. He almost went bankrupt to buy a top-grade magic staff. It was destroyed in less than half a month. Now, he even had the mood to kill himself. How could he care about anything else? Are you blaspheming the gods? Adolf's face immediately changed, and so did his temperament. Just a moment ago, his tone had always been slow and gentle, but now it was full of steel-like hardness. A piercingly cold and frightening aura was emitted from his body. The air was instantly filled with an invisible pressure, or in other words, it was a repelling force. Including the three of them, including those people who were more than 20 meters away, all of them took a few steps back. The magician's face changed. He never thought that the old man in front of him would have such a strong reaction. Adolf waved his hand, and a white ball of light shot out. This was a spell that most priests could easily cast, the bullet of holy light. However, Adolf's bullet of holy light was extremely fast. As he waved his hand forward, the bullet of holy light crossed the distance of more than 20 meters in an instant and hit the magician's face. Blood splattered. The bullet of holy light penetrated the magician's skull and continued to fly forward. It flew for hundreds of meters before disappearing into the air. The magician was still sitting on his horse, as if the attack had no effect on him. However, there was a bowl-sized, bloody hole in the center of his head. His eyebrows, eyes, nose, and half of his mouth were gone. His lower lip was intact. The magician's companions could clearly see a row of white lower teeth. They could also see soft and bloody things falling from the top of the circle. Then the magician slowly fell backward. However, his feet were still in the stirrups. His body lay quietly on the horse's back. The horse under him didn't feel anything and was still snorting leisurely. The swordsman who injured Sylvia reacted quickly. He didn't try to escape, nor did he attack. Instead, he scrambled down from the horse's back and fell to his knees. His right hand was placed horizontally in front of his chest. His eyes were slightly closed, and his mouth was muttering something. No one knew what he was saying. The others immediately came to their senses and scrambled to jump down from their horses. However, their postures were very chaotic. Some of them put their hands together, and some even kowtowed. Their mouths were opening and closing exaggeratedly. Perhaps they didn't know how to pray or repent, but they had to clearly show their mouths. Adolf didn't attack again. He just stood aside and watched quietly. For this group of people, a day felt like a year. Some of them pretended for a long time, and when they saw that Adolf didn't respond, they secretly opened their eyes. When they saw that Adolf was looking at them, they were so scared that they broke out in cold sweat. Reflexively, they closed their eyes tightly again, and their mouths opened and closed even more intensely. Not to mention the accomplices of the blasphemer. Even Chi Li and the other two were silent. They didn't dare to move. Sylvia's personality was even more carefree than Morrison's. However, at this moment, she was also frightened by Adolf's thunderous attack. Sometimes, time would pass very slowly. The sun rose higher and higher, and the farmer who had escaped also returned to the wheat field. They curiously looked over and pointed at the wheat field. The number of people on the continent gradually increased. The orc army was shrinking towards the Bite Man army. Some merchant groups with a keen sense of smell felt the signal of peace, and they boldly resumed their trade. Almost everyone who passed by would curiously stop to look at the scene. When they saw the corpse lying on the horse, they hurriedly left. In the end, Sylvia couldn't take it anymore. Although the magic that the old man had cast on her was very effective and greatly reduced her pain, her body was still weak. She needed to sit down and rest. The three of them carefully whispered a few words to each other and slowly moved to the wheat field and sat on the ridge. If they had to kneel without moving for half an hour, they could grit their teeth and endure it. Any longer, and it would be torture. Moreover, they didn't know when it would end, and they didn't have a specific target. Their endurance quickly crumbled. Finally, one of the magicians couldn't take it anymore and fell to the ground. Then he bounced up as if he had been electrocuted and turned his head to look at Adolf. He suddenly realized that Adolf was looking at him with a smile. Perhaps it was because Adolf's smile was very kind. He gained the courage to stand up unsteadily. "Have you repented?" Adolf asked softly. The magician nodded his head like a chicken pecking at rice. He didn't dare to forget the lesson of the past, no matter what. Don't be discouraged. God doesn't care about your past. He only cares about your future. You should start now, understand? The magician continued to nod his head frantically. Okay, you can go now. The magician was wild with joy. He staggered to the side of his horse and wanted to climb up, but his knees were already numb from kneeling. He tried for a long time, but still couldn't get up. When the others heard this, they were also happy and stood up one by one. Have you repented? The doctrine didn't allow people to be implicated. Everyone had to be responsible for their own actions, but they didn't have to be responsible for the actions of others, so Adolf didn't want to hurt them. The group of people nodded their heads frantically. The scene was very comical. You can go now. With a loud bang, the group of people scattered, using all their strength to rush towards their horses. However, their movements were very uncoordinated, like a group of zombies. This was not difficult to understand, as they had been kneeling for too long. Sylvia didn't expect such an ending. She was very anxious and wanted to say something. Chile reacted quickly. She pulled Sylvia's arm and signaled Sylvia not to talk nonsense with her eyes. Adolf slowly turned around and walked to Sylvia. Are you better now? His tone was still very soft. Yes, thank you, Sylvia said sincerely. You don't have to thank me. Adolf smiled. It's God who is protecting you, and I'm just the most loyal servant of God. Thank the great God of light. Chile sighed piously. Then she hesitated. Mr. Adolf, can I ask you for a favor? What's the matter? Can you send us to the Holy Crown City? Chapter 410. 3 days had passed, and the relationship between Hanjin and Sunir was gradually improving. Although the improvement was not great, at least Sunir was not as cold as before. In public, Sunir could also chat with Hanjin. On the one hand, it was because Morrison's and the others were always trying to get close to her. On the other hand, after a few days of thinking, she had seen through herself. Could she really forget the past? She couldn't. Sunir was deeply concerned about that man. Sometimes she would hide away from him on purpose, but she couldn't help but pay attention to him. She even pricked up her ears to eavesdrop on his conversations with others. That experience had moved her, made her laugh, and made her satisfied. 2.5 years was nothing for an elf with a long life, but it was unforgettable and unforgettable for Sunir. From a protector to a protected one, from a stranger to a friend, and finally to a lover. This kind of natural change was hard to replicate. Sunir knew that perhaps in her life, she would never be able to completely open her heart like this again. She knew that she couldn't forget, but she didn't want to accept this result. Therefore, her behavior was very contradictory. Sometimes she would forget to be vigilant and unconsciously immerse herself in the harmonious atmosphere, chatting and laughing with Hanjin, Morrison's, and the others. When she woke up, she would immediately put on a cold attitude, rejecting the intimacy of others. However, Hanjin was very patient. He didn't care about Sunir's attitude at all. He didn't care about honor or disgrace. There was a saying in another world, a strong woman is afraid of a persistent man. Not only men could be refined by circling finger, but also women. As for his face, Hanjin had never taken it seriously. Usually, only those who had no face would try their best to defend themselves. They wouldn't allow anyone to offend them. As a lord, Hanjin's strength was unfathomable. No matter in the Holy Crown City or in the elves' camp, almost everyone was respectful to him. Sunir's tough attitude was a novelty to him. However, even when she was at her lowest, Sunir still held the bottom line. She wouldn't board the god of war because she knew that Yelena was on the ship. Just like how Yelena didn't dare to come to the elven camp, she didn't want to see her either. Hanjin could understand. Sunir's reaction was normal. If Sunir could talk and laugh with him without any scruples, or even board the god of war to see Yelena, that would be really bad. On this day, everyone gathered on the god of war, including Galbin. Ever since he came here as a guest, Galbin had also fallen in love with the god of war. He couldn't tell the specific reason. It was just a feeling. Han Jin had successfully set up the spirit gathering array. It absorbed and accumulated the spirit chi of heaven and earth. This was the most basic function of the spirit gathering array. Guevara and the others had lived on the god of war for a long time, so they didn't feel it so obviously. However, when Gao Bin boarded the god of war for the first time, he immediately felt the difference. He felt very comfortable here. In the distance, a dozen knights and a team of elves riding on silver Pegasi galloped over. Dominique, who was standing at the side of the ship, was the first to notice the situation. She narrowed her eyes and observed for a moment, then turned back and said, "General Lang Ning is here." "Lang Ning? Why is he here?" Morrison's was stunned. He then stood up and walked to Dominique's side, looking into the distance. Most of the time, Morrison's refused to get close to Dominique. He was tall and burly, and in his own words, he was a real man. However, standing next to Dominique, he became a child, especially when looking at his back. However, these few days were a little special. He was not in the mood to practice his swordsmanship. According to Morrison's own analysis, he might be about to break through the bottleneck. The problem was he knew that he should work harder to break through the bottleneck, but he just couldn't bring himself to do it. Hearing that Lang Ning was here, Sesu and Leger also stood up and stopped bothering Lorraine for the time being. There were two more girls on the ship. Logically speaking, Sesu and Leger, who were single, should divide the girls equally. Each of them had their own target and then pursue it. Unfortunately, not everything could be done in the same way. Both of them had feelings for Lorraine, and because of Lorraine's identity, they didn't dare to show it openly. However, there was a lot of competition between them. Morrison's was the most excited. He could finally say goodbye to the old society. No matter who he didn't like, he could contact them and beat them up. It wasn't that Leslie wasn't good. Although she was from a noble family, the two girls didn't put on airs. However, their temperaments were very different. Lorraine was like a little sister next door, while Leslie had a straightforward and generous personality. For these two young men, the former was more attractive. The sad thing was that Lorraine and Leslie were Yelena's best friends. When they heard about the story between Yelena and Han Jin, they were moved by it. They unconsciously set a very high attraction point for themselves. If they weren't a prince-type hero, it would be very difficult for them to be interested. Using Han Jin as a yardstick to measure, it was a tragedy for Sesu and Leger. Soon, Lang Ning arrived at the bottom of the God of War. He jumped off his horse and climbed up the suspension ladder. "Lang Ning, what happened?" Someone from Morrison's University shouted. Lang Ning jumped onto the deck and looked at Morrison's with a meaningful gaze. He smiled but didn't say anything. "What are you laughing at?" Morrison's was confused. "I'll tell you later." Lang Ning glanced around and found that there was an unfamiliar elf on the ship. He couldn't help but be surprised. "Lang Ning, let me introduce you." Guevara said, "This is Gao Bin." "Gao Bin, this is the army commander of Riptide, Lang Ning." "Hello." Gao Bin nodded. "Nice to meet you." Ronning bowed slightly to show his respect. At this time, Han Jin also received the report and walked up from the deck. "Lang Ning, what happened? How did you get here?" "Of course I came from the Bite Man." "I can't fly," Lang Ning said. "Bite Man? The orcs didn't give you any trouble?" "No, I'm from the Holy Crown City." "How dare they?" Lang Ning laughed. "On the contrary, they treated me very well. When I passed by Bite Man City, Lionel came out in person. When Gao Bin was hesitating whether he should leave or not, Han Jin asked again, 'What happened in the Holy Crown City?' Lang Ning was very smart. He had deliberately avoided the question just now, and he believed that Han Jin also understood. If he asked him again, it meant that he didn't need to worry about the unfamiliar elf. So he answered frankly, "Something happened. Good or bad?" Morrison's interrupted. "It's both a good thing and a bad thing." Lang Ning said slowly, "Sir, I saw Miss Chi Li, Miss Sylvia, and little Joseph, but we didn't find them. They came back by themselves." "Sylvia came?" Leger glanced at Morrison's with a wicked smile. "That's good. They were chased by a mercenary group on the road. Fortunately, they were saved by the Vatican at the critical moment." Lang Ning said, "The Vatican sent them to the Holy Crown City. But after they parted, they were attacked again. Miss Sylvia and little Joseph were both seriously injured, but Miss Cheeley was fine. It seems that the attackers didn't care about the lives of the others. They just want to take Miss Cheeley away. What? Sylvia was injured? Morrison's University was shocked. In fact, Morrison's was ridiculous at the moment. He always denied the relationship between him and Sylvia, saying that a hero like him would never marry a savage girl. His inconsistent attitude should have made Sasu and Leger laugh secretly. But now no one could laugh. Yes, Lang Ning nodded. Fortunately, the Cardinal Haysh received the urgent notice from the Vatican and hurried to the Vatican. He happened to see the attack and scare the attackers away. He also released the healing magic in time to cure Sylvia and little Joseph. Otherwise, we may never see them again. Damn it, who did it? Morrison's roared. We haven't found out yet. Lang Ning paused and smiled bitterly. My lord, it turns out that we have occupied the Holy Crown City for too short time. We're not perfect in all aspects and left too many loopholes. If such an attack happened in any other city, the attackers would never be able to escape. Besides, the Vatican was also attacked a few days ago. My lord, we have heard the alarm bell twice. Gibran's face was a bit red. In fact, the security team in the Holy Crown City was just a decoration. They could take care of ordinary civilians, but it was impossible for them to respond to such an attack in time. Han Jin wanted to establish an organization similar to the Purple Flower. Gibran, Chipango, and Howlister were the main leaders. They had to take responsibility for this. What's more, Chipango and Howlister were still busy in the Holy Crown City. And Gibran, because he wanted to see Julia, left everything else and came here to have fun. Is there anything else? Han Jin asked in a low voice. He knew that although Chi Li and Sylvia were their friends, this shouldn't be the reason why Lang Ning passed through the Bite Man and came here in person to deliver the message. The first person who saved Chi Li and Sylvia was called Adolf. His position in the Vatican. What did you say his name was? Han Jin showed a shocked look. His name is Adolf. My lord, what's wrong? Lang Ning was stunned. There was no sound in the room. All eyes were focused on Han Jin. No one knew when Han Jin had become unfathomable. No matter what kind of crisis he was facing, they couldn't find a trace of panic on Han Jin's face. Of course, this kind of leisurely and calm temperament gave people a sense of security. But at this moment, just a name was enough to make Han Jin lose his composure. Even a fool could understand that this Adolf was definitely not simple. Raphael, who is Adolf? Guevara asked in a serious tone. An ascetic of the Vatican. His strength should be above that of the Pope. Han Jin said slowly. You mean the Pope who died in the never-setting sun mountains, including him, the previous Pope, and the one before that? Han Jin's voice was a bit low. He believed in Solomon's judgment and wanted to get rid of this disaster before Adolf arrived at the Vatican. But the problem was that the Holy Crown City was just a newly rising power group and was still immature in all aspects. If Solomon asked him to get rid of a strong man who had a fixed residence, he would have tried to do it long ago. Because he had strong Taoist skills, he was not afraid of anything. But it was too difficult to find a lone ascetic, at least for the Holy Crown City. Even Solomon couldn't figure out Adolf's whereabouts, let alone Han Jin. Where did you know there was such a person in the Vatican? Guevara was shocked. It was Grand Duke Solomon who told me. Not simple, not simple. Guevara muttered to himself. No one knew whether he was talking about Adolf or Solomon. In fact, Adolf's strength was above that of the Pope. Of course, it was not simple. And Solomon knew the Vatican thousands of miles away like the back of his hand. He even knew Adolf's true strength. It was not simple either. There was silence in the field. Lang Ning was stunned for a long time and sighed. No wonder. No wonder what? Dominique interrupted. She was also curious about this matter. After Adolf arrived at the Vatican held a grand celebration. Then the Vatican's attitude became tougher. How tough can they be? Han Jin said coldly. The Vatican arrested Howlister. Ronning's face was full of helplessness. Han Jin had almost taken everyone away. With just him and Alexander, there was no way they could stop the Holy See. They could only watch helplessly. Lang Ning's news stunned everyone. They arrested Hallister? Why? Hogan screamed. The young people did not understand the political implications. Hogan understood it, and, of course, Guevara understood it even more. But he could not easily express his opinion. Han Jin's face had become as cold as an iceberg. The Vatican said that Hallister invited sorcerers to the banquet, which almost destroyed the defense system of the Holy Crown City. That was why the dragons could easily break in, Lang Ning said. They said that Hallister must be an accomplice. Otherwise, it would not be so coincidental. Even if Hallister is really guilty, we should be the ones to investigate. Why? Hogan became even more exasperated. Han Jin slowly walked to the side of the ship and looked at the horizon. After a moment, he let out a long sigh. Solomon had once again proven that Solomon was right. Solomon had understood that Han Jin truly wanted to cooperate with Jeds, so he had warned him in advance that he must eliminate Adolf first. Otherwise, Adolf would bring them great trouble. Now, it seemed that Solomon was right. What should he do? In front of Chazos was a very smart and far-sighted young lord. He was just a little arrogant. This role in itself forced Chazos to make a choice, which was to cooperate with Han Jin wholeheartedly until the final goal was achieved and Han Jin was completely useless. Only then would he consider other options. Because Han Jin was smart and far-sighted, any form of deception was dangerous. The slightest carelessness could push Han Jin to Dragon City. Chazos's personality tended to be conservative. He could cooperate with Chazos happily, but with another guardian, Harriet, they almost fell out. This proved that Chazos had made a lot of reasonable concessions. Therefore, during the cooperation period, he could trust Chazos. Chazos would never take risks for no reason. In front of Dragon City, Han Jin became a villain who was eager for quick success. Because the value of Dragon City's promise was far greater than Chazos' Star Gold, he immediately joined Dragon City and turned a plot against the Dragon Realm. However, villains also had their own principles. In the face of Forza's threat, Han Jin fought to the end and covered Xavier's escape. His eagerness for quick success provided Dragon City with a means of control. His steadfastness won Dragon City's trust. His miraculous magic gave Dragon City hope. In this way, the two sides had a sufficient foundation for cooperation. Dragon City urgently needed to find a person who could compete with Nicholas. Originally, they had taken a fancy to the elves, but now they should be very disappointed with the elves. Forza's sudden betrayal put the elves in a desperate situation. How could they fight against Nicholas, who had so many strong subordinates? The elves couldn't do it, but Han Jin could. In the Great Gravity Enchantment, Han Jin could still fight with the completely crazy Forza. Although it couldn't last long. How old was Han Jin now? What about in 10 years? There were many things that he didn't need to express clearly. The dragons of Dragon City were not fools. They could judge for themselves. These two roles were relatively successful. Now, what kind of person should he play to force Adolf to bow down? The possibility of getting rid of Adolf was very small. Plot against him? There were only two people who were suitable to take action. One was himself, and the other was Majordomo Gale. But no matter who it was, they had to go all out when attacking Adolf. Hiding their strength when dealing with such an unpredictable strong person was simply courting death. And going all out naturally meant that he couldn't hide his identity. Once he failed, he would be completely separated from the Vatican, which would be extremely unfavorable for his future. Besides, he didn't want to lose Jeds as a friend. In his heart, he appreciated and admired Jeds very much. He really didn't want to turn a powerful helper into an enemy. Lang Ning, what did Jeds say? Guevara asked slowly. I contacted Jeds before I came here. Lang Ning replied, when Adolf proposed to arrest Hallister. For people in the Vatican clearly objected. Jeds, Adonis, Amijay, and Cardinal Heiss. Adonis also objected. Guevara didn't believe it. In his impression, Adonis was a fanatical old believer. His attitude should have been very fierce. Yes, and his attitude was very firm. He said that Hal Lister was a trusted follower of His Excellency. Even if he wanted to do something, he had to wait until His Excellency came back. He couldn't act on his own. After all, the Holy Crown City wasn't their territory. In the end, he even had a dispute with Adolf. Then, who supported Adolf? Saint Knight, Aud, and other cardinals all supported Adolf. Aud. Galbin was stunned and murmured, "I should have heard this name somewhere. Oh, he seems to be Blanche's husband." Blanche's husband? Guevara was also stunned. He certainly had a deep impression of Aud, but he didn't know who Blanche was. After being stunned for a moment, he suddenly remembered that he seemed to have seen her at the banquet a few days ago. Chapter 411. Do we need to ask Blanche to come here? Galbin said slowly. He could see that Han Jean and the others were facing a big problem. With Blanche's help, you should be able to know more about Aud. It's useless. Guevara whispered. Jedi's Adonis and Amijay were all against it, but they still couldn't stop him. Adding Aud would be meaningless. But Blanche came from the southwest. Galbin said, as far as I know, because of her relationship with Aud, she knows the situation of the Holy See very well, at least more than you. Raphael? Guevara wanted to ask Han Jin's opinion, but Han Jin was staring blankly into the distance, as if he didn't hear him. Raphael, let's go back. Morrison shouted. He was worried about the situation in the Holy Crown City, and he didn't know how Sylvia's injury was, so he was anxious. With the speed of the God of War, we can reach the Holy Crown City in 2 days. But what can we do when we go back? Turn against the Holy See? Guevara said slowly. If we can't make up our minds, we might as well not go back. Of course, Guevara's vision was more far-sighted than Morrison's. The Holy See had made such a big move, and it was inevitable that the people in the Holy Crown City were in a panic. Many people were quietly waiting for Han Jin's return. The moment Han Jin appeared in the Holy Crown City, they must clearly express their attitude. Otherwise, the people's hearts will be even more chaotic. I'll go find Blanche. Let's gather our thoughts and think about what to do. Galbin stood up. Because of Sunir and his personal appreciation for Han Jin, the Holy Crown City and the elves had not signed an ordinary agreement, but a brotherhood agreement. The situation in the Holy Crown City was unstable, which would have a serious impact on the elves. Therefore, Han Jin's business was the elves' business. It didn't take long for Galbin to appear on the deck again, followed by several elves. Blanche and Lydia were here, but they were not the focus. The focus was on the last elf, Sunir. Sunir, long time no see. Seeing Sunir, Lang Ming hurriedly greeted her. Long time no see. Sunir's smile was a bit forced. She didn't want to come, but Galbin looked very serious and even made an ominous prediction. The Holy See was going to occupy the Holy Crown City, and Han Jin would definitely be driven out. This made Sunir very nervous. She had to figure out what happened in the Holy Crown City, how Han Jin would deal with it, and whether Han Jin would be in danger. The last question was, of course, the most important. Different from before, she had activated the Mark of God. No matter how powerful the enemy was, she believed that she would not be as helpless as before. Sunir, hello. Yelena was even more nervous than Sunir, so she stuttered when speaking. Sunir suddenly fell into silence, which made everyone nervous. After a moment, Sunir slowly said, "Hello." Long time no see, Yelena said dryly. She really didn't know what to say. Yes. Sunir smiled, and then turned her eyes to Lang Ning. Lang Ning, what happened? The relationship between Sunir and Lang Ning had always been very harmonious, because they both served as commanders and had a lot in common. A long time ago, Han Jin faced his feelings for the first time, mainly because he was stimulated by Lang Ning. At that time, Sunir and Lang Ning were very close, and the two often got together to chat happily, which made Han Jin feel very jealous and uncomfortable. He even did some extremely childish things, which was to stop Sunir and Lang Ning from being together. Of course, after their relationship became clear, Hanjin no longer interfered with Sunir. After all, he was a young man in modern society, and he knew how to respect Sunir. Lang Ning told the whole story again. The situation was very tense, which made Sunir frown. Didn't you say that Sunir has become the Pope? How could he not restrain himself? Did he deliberately? Jed's character is impeccable. He would not lie to me, Lang Ning said. Yes. Guevara nodded. When it came to personal strength, Jed's was definitely not the most outstanding, but when it came to Jed's character, everyone in the Holy Crown City group was convinced, including Guevara and Majordomo Gale. But it doesn't make sense. Sunir said, Jed's holds the highest power in the Holy See. Can't he restrain Adolf? You underestimate Adolf too much. Hanjin suddenly interrupted, then sighed and turned around. When he saw Sunir, he was surprised. Sunir, why are you here? Am I not welcome? Sunir said faintly. No, of course not. You know what I mean. Hanjin smiled bitterly. As he spoke, he looked at her from the corner of his eye. When he found that her expression was normal, he was relieved. Sunir knew her limits. She knew that now was definitely not the time to throw a tantrum with Hanjin. So she changed the topic. You said that we all underestimated Adolf? You know him very well? No, actually, no one dares to say that they know him well. I just know that there is such a person. Hanjin paused and said slowly, everyone knows the system of the Holy See. Although the Pope does not interfere with the specific political affairs of the Holy See, he holds the highest power. He can appoint, dismiss, and replace archbishops and diocesan bishops. The only three armed forces of the Holy See, the Supreme Court of Arbitration, the College of Cardinals, and the Knights of Light, are also in the Pope's hands. So, here comes the problem. What problem? Sunir asked. Everyone who holds the highest power will swear that he can make everyone's lives better and stronger. Even if he knows that he can't do it, he will still say it. Hanjin said slowly, if time proves that the person is not suitable to be the Pope, what can be done to remove him? Or rather, how can we maintain the strength of the Holy See and ensure that every Pope has enough talent? A long time ago, the Supreme Court of Arbitration had the power to remove the Pope. When the believers doubted the Pope's ability, the Supreme Court of Arbitration would vote. If more than 2/3 of the archbishops and cardinals thought that the Pope was not qualified, they could remove him. But in reality, this would not work. The Pope's power would inevitably infiltrate the Supreme Court of Arbitration. It would not take long for everyone inside to become the Pope's confidants. No matter how bad the Pope's actions were, no one could remove him. In the end, the ascetics were born. Ascetics? Yes, ascetics. Hanjin was silent for a moment. The ascetics never live in the Holy See. They are the mysterious protectors of the Holy See. They rarely interfere with the Holy See's politics and have no power to interfere. Their only power is to remove the Pope. The ascetics are so powerful. Sunir asked in shock. Everyone has a lot of questions, right? Hanjin smiled faintly. The ascetics never live in the Holy See. Who would recognize them? The Pope has the highest power and has been planning for many years. How could he be removed so easily? What if the Pope uses the Holy See to fight against the ascetics? Yes. Sasu nodded vigorously. He was a bard, after all. He was very interested in this kind of story. It's very simple. Power. Overwhelming power. Hanjin sighed softly. The most powerful person in the Holy See is not the Pope, nor is it the archbishops or the Holy Knight. It is the ascetics. How is that possible? Several people asked in unison. It's possible. At this point, Hanjin felt a headache coming on. The ascetics have a unique inheritance. In their lifetime, they will only choose one student. After a long period of observation and confirming that their student is qualified, they will pass their power to their student. What did you say? Morrison screamed. Pass their power to their student? Raphael, are you joking? Do I look like I'm joking? Hanjin said faintly. I didn't know how they did it before, but now I know. How? Almost everyone pricked up their ears, waiting for Hanjin's answer. The Holy Crystal. Hanjin smiled. The Holy See has more than one holy crystal. There should be a few smaller ones. The ascetics can use the holy crystal to transfer their power. Everyone on the deck was dumbfounded. This news was too shocking. It overturned the common sense of the continent. If everyone could transfer their power, then what was the point of cultivation? You just have to have an illustrious family background or find a good teacher. You just have to try your best to please your teacher. I understand now. Yelena suddenly screamed, then suddenly realized something and quickly shut her mouth. The magic array set up by Hanjin could absorb the energy of the magic crystal. The two effects were the same. No wonder Hanjin schemed against the Holy Sea and stole the Holy Crystal. But she couldn't reveal the secret, so she kept silent. However, she guessed wrong. Hanjin only fully understood the Holy Crystal after stealing the magic crystal. The ascetics will consume a lot of their power in the process of transferring their power. Hanjin continued, otherwise, the power of the ascetics should be getting stronger and stronger, but that's not the case. Even if there is consumption, it's already terrifying. Guevara smiled bitterly. Those who receive the inheritance would definitely not be fools. They had to be outstanding in terms of talent, faith, and so on. Only then would they be able to gain the trust of the previous generation of ascetics. With their own tireless cultivation and the inheritance they received, their power would naturally surpass that of the Pope. This kind of inheritance is very difficult. Hanjin said softly, I just said that after they choose a student, they will carefully observe them for a period of time. Do you know how long it will take? How long? Sunir asked. 10 years, or even a few decades. Oh my God, this is too torturous, Lorraine exclaimed. If your goal is to obtain the inheritance, waiting for a few decades, of course you will feel pain. But if everything you do is to strengthen your faith, this is nothing. On the contrary, you will enjoy it. Hanjin said slowly, the ascetics use this method to ensure the purity of the inheritance. As long as you have distracting thoughts, selfishness, and pain in your heart, you will not be able to escape the ascetic's eyes. Everyone looked at each other. Just now, some of them had already thought about whether they should find an ascetic to be their teacher. But Hanjin's words instantly shattered their fantasies. Enduring for a few decades was too scary. Of course, Hanjin's words made sense. For a true believer, it was indeed nothing. If a person with impure motives can really endure for a few decades, he is qualified to obtain the inheritance. Guevara sighed. Yes, I guess he will have become a pure believer in the end. Major Domo Gale shook his head. There is another problem with this method of inheritance. Hanjin smiled and said, if an ascetic has reached the end of his life, but he did not test a student for long enough to determine if the student has a firm faith, will he pass on his power? Difficult, very difficult, Guevara said. If you choose to trust, you will be worried that you will pass on the wrong person. If you choose not to trust, you will waste your own inheritance. But this is a bit. Raphael, you just said, ascetics? Gao Bin suddenly interrupted. That means there is more than one ascetic in the Holy See? Yes. Hanjin nodded and said, in the beginning, there were a total of 3 ascetics in the Holy See. This is to ensure that they can still make decisions in time, even if there is internal disunity. Sometimes, the ascetics will become 2 or even 1. Sometimes, they will return to 2 or 3. I don't know them well, so I can't guess the details. But I think that the inheritance of the ascetics will not be wasted. Before they die, they can transfer all their power into the Holy Crystal and then pass the Holy Crystal to another ascetic. They can also leave the choice to their companions. I see. Guevara nodded and said, I knew it. Their inheritance will not be wasted. Actually, it is not easy to be an ascetic. Hanjin said, they used all kinds of methods to train their willpower and strengthen their beliefs. Haha, that can no longer be considered training, but an extreme form of torture. For example, Adolphe, when he received the inheritance, he should have been in his 50s. It has been 40 years since then, and in these 40 years, he has never laid down. Impossible. Then how does he sleep? Morrison said. He sleeps sitting down or standing up. He can sleep standing up. Morrison's eyes widened. This was unimaginable for him. Is it strange? Han Jin said softly, you can't do it, but doesn't mean that others can't. Can you? Morrison's was not convinced. This is not a matter of whether or not I can do it. It is not necessary. Han Jin smiled. There are too many sufferings in life. If I can't even have the right to sleep comfortably, I'd rather die. So you can't become a follower. Guevara laughed. Ha! I don't want to become a follower either. To you, sleep is the most important thing? Sunir suddenly asked. Her tone was a little strange. Yes, we all have to die, Yelena replied. She was feeling a little uncomfortable just now, but she didn't want to say it out loud. Now that Sunir had spoken, she had the courage to question. Sleep is more important than me, than all of us? After saying that, she realized that they were in public. She couldn't help but blush and add, more important than all of us. Yelena's reaction was a little slow. At first, she wanted to say me, but then she remembered Sunir and quickly corrected herself. Finally, she said all of us again and again, which made Guevara and the others smile with interest. Han Jin was stunned and then showed a helpless expression. A woman's rationality in love was indeed difficult to trust. He had just said it casually, but who would have thought that it would be taken to the forefront? So, Adolf's strength should be far above Jed's, and he also has the power to depose Jed's. Major Domo Gale sighed. This is difficult. Raphael, since you're in the mood to talk so much with us, it means that you should have a way to deal with Adolf. Guevara said with a smile. Is that really the case? Major Domo Gale was stunned and hurriedly asked. I have an idea. Han Jin said softly, but to implement it, I need some time. So we can go back to the Holy Crown City now. Morrison's University was happy. No. Han Jin shook his head. When can we go back? After we defeat Lionel. Morrison's face fell. Do you miss Sylvia? Sasu asked. No, why would I miss her? Morrison's straightened his neck. It's you who miss her, right? Yes, I admit, I miss her very much. Sasu said with a smile. Morrison's couldn't help but be angry, but he was the one who said it, so he couldn't lose his temper. He could only stare at Sasu. Sylvia is a good girl. Leger patted Sasu's shoulder heavily and said loudly, Come on, work hard. This time, Morrison's was even angrier. Sasu also gritted his teeth and secretly glanced at Lorraine. It was obvious that Leger was almost shouting, and Lorraine had no reason not to hear him. At this moment, Lorraine was whispering something to Leslie. They were probably talking about the strange Sylvia. Raphael, what do you want to do? Tell us, so that we can cooperate with you in the future. Gao Bin said. In his opinion, Han Jin wanted to cooperate with the Holy Church, but there were some hardliners in the Holy Church who were aggressive. This was a dead knot that couldn't be untied, so he was very curious. It won't work if I tell you. Han Jin smiled. Gao Bin, it's useless to ask. This guy likes to pretend to be mysterious. Guevara pointed at Han Jin with his finger. Yes. Major Domo Gale also said in a dissatisfied tone. When we were dealing with Zagund, he always disappeared. None of us knew what he was doing. I'm telling the truth. Han Jin shrugged. Lang Ning, come with me. Chapter 412. Sirs, please have a seat. Please have a seat. Rhinelander smiled and moved aside, but beastmen had a special appearance. Because of their two protruding fangs, no matter how happy or sincere their smiles were, one couldn't feel any warmth from them. Impugila and Prudence looked at each other and slowly sat down. This was the city hall of Bite City. Although the orcs were not good at creating things, they were good at seizing things. Now, this city hall had become the place where Rinnell gave orders. Rinnell, what do you want? Just say it. Prudence said coldly. He had been holding this question in his heart for a long time. Lionel was silent for a moment before he chuckled and said, Indeed, we should have a clear discussion. Impugila and Prudence looked at each other again and tried to keep calm. Impugila said slowly, Sire Rinnell, what do you want to talk about? These days, you two sirs have not been wronged. I asked my people to take good care of you. Do you know why? Reynolds' eyes were full of interest. Why? Prudence was very disgusted by Reynolds' attitude, which seemed to be in control of everything. However, he had to cooperate because his fate was indeed in Reynolds' hands. Because I don't trust Raphael. I don't dare to trust him. He is too insidious, Lionel said. I've already told the two of you many times. All of this was planned by Raphael. Of course, I admit that I did gain a lot of benefits, but the Beastmen also paid a considerable price. His schemes are very deep, so I have to be extra careful. I understand what you mean. Impugila thought for a moment. Your decision is wise. Raphael cannot be trusted. He must be plotting against you, right? But if you really want to deal with Raphael, you should let me and Prudence go back to the elves. As long as we trust each other and cooperate sincerely, we can definitely thwart any of Raphael's schemes. Moreover, you only saw how sinister Raphael is, but you didn't see how terrifying Galbin is. The longer this drags on, the more disadvantageous it will be for us. When Galbin completely controls the elves, it will be meaningless even if we can return. Lord Ampugila, you and Raphael are natural enemies. Lionel laughed. Raphael has always been describing the beauty of a peaceful future to me, but you're trying your best to promote the hidden dangers. Lord Rhinelander, I'm not joking. Upgula's expression was very serious. I know. Actually, this is also the main reason why I kept the two of you here. Both Abdura and Prudence's faces turned ugly. The word stay had a heavy meaning, which made them feel uneasy. However, I just saw the messenger from the Holy Crown City. Raphael and Galbin will arrive at the Bite Man tomorrow to hold a 3-party meeting. Lionel continued. As you know, Raphael has mastered a lot of incomprehensible magic. I'm worried that he will find that you are still alive, which will be very disadvantageous for me. So, you are useless now. Prudence's expression changed drastically. Just as he was about to jump up, Impugila had already grabbed his arm and shook his head slightly. Then, Impugila shifted his gaze to Rionel. Rionel, can you tell that they're here for peace? Is there really no conspiracy? Conspiracy? Lord Ampugila, it seems that, for you, this world seems to be full of conspiracies. You think too much. Don't you feel tired? You think too little. Upgula sneered. We have been dealing with Raphael longer than you. Think about Zagund and Dismark. How did they die? How did they die? Lionel seemed to be very cooperative. Upgula was stunned. He was just reminding Lionel that the young human lord was not a good person. He had killed Zagund and Dismark one after another. As for the details, how could he know? You don't know? Lionel sighed. Actually, when it comes to Raphael, I know much more than you. You guys, find Viller for me. Several orc warriors at the door of the hall turned around and walked out. Not long after, they hurried back into the hall. Behind them, a short figure followed. It was a dwarf. It was said that dwarves were bad-tempered, reckless, and fearless, but this was not absolute. In this city, completely controlled by the orcs, no matter how bad-tempered and reckless they were, they had to tuck their tails between their legs. If they really angered the orcs would not hesitate to do anything. Viller, come here. Lionel greeted him intimately. The dwarf named Viller walked towards Lionel with a smile on his face. He nodded with every step and bowed with every 3 steps. His attitude was extremely respectful. This is the dwarf forging master, Viller. He has helped me a lot. Lionel smiled. Coincidentally, 3 years ago, Viller lived in a place called Radon Town. Viller, tell me what you know again. Viller breathed a sigh of relief. Although he was not good at telling stories, he knew a lot of facts. He knew about Han Jin's downfall, the appearance of Morrison's, and Chile. But at that time, he never thought that Han Jin's reputation would become more and more famous, and he even became a dragon slayer. Impugila and Prudence looked at each other. They couldn't believe that Han Jin had such a downfall. Of course, one person's name might be repeated, but it was very unlikely that 2 people's names were the same. When they heard the name of Morrison's, they were almost sure that Han Jin came from Radon Town. When Raphael asked me to cooperate with him, I had already begun to investigate him. How can I trust him without knowing his past? Lionel laughed. You heard it too, right? Raphael was originally a fallen noble. How should I put it? He was very, very lazy. He had such an amazing magic system, but he did not like to work hard on cultivation. He was willing to be a beggar. Can this be explained by laziness? And Pugila sneered again. Why not? Lionel asked. Every time I think of Raphael's past, I always have a complicated feeling, because I was also very lazy, huh? I was the eldest son of the legal wife, and I was much stronger than my younger brothers. So I was too lazy to practice hard. Until one day, something happened and changed me completely. I really didn't know that fear could be turned into motivation. And Raphael is very similar to me in this respect. This marks soldiers wantonly slaughtered the villagers of Radon Town and finally burned down Radon Town. That's how he awakened. In this chaotic world, one must have great power to survive. And Pugila thought that Lionel's explanation was a bit far-fetched. But Lionel was immersed in the realm of mutual appreciation, so he didn't say anything. Besides, Lionel's words were full of viciousness. If he couldn't find out the use of them, he might turn hostile and kill them immediately. Although Ampugila's face was calm, he was panicking inside. His brain was running fast. But after thinking for a long time, Ampugila finally found that he was really useless. After leaving the elves for so many days, Galbin must have completely controlled the situation. If he was forcibly deprived of the halo on his head, he would just be an ordinary elf. The fact that Raphael and Galbin were willing to come to Bite City for negotiation was a sign of their sincerity, which made Rhine see the hope of peace. Therefore, he and Prudence were of no use to him anymore. Should he join Lionel? No, although Lionel kept saying that Raphael was very similar to him. In fact, he was extremely wary of Raphael. From the conversation just now, he clearly knew that Raphael's purpose was to kill him and Prudence. Even if they were willing to join Lionel, would Lionel dare to risk offending Raphael to keep them? Furthermore, he was the great elder of the United Senate. It could be said that he was the highest leader of the Elven Alliance. He would be cursed for thousands of years. Thinking about it, Ampugila couldn't help but feel disheartened. If he could return to the elves and regain control of the situation, he could make concessions to the Beastmen in all aspects. However, he really couldn't just surrender to the Beastmen. Don't you have anything to say? Lionel's eyes swept back and forth between Ampugila and Prudence. He used death as a threat in order to obtain the secrets of the elves, so that he could seize the initiative in the negotiation as much as possible. However, it turned out that his threat seemed to have gone too far. Ampugila's face turned ashen, and he finally fell into silence. Lionel had to remind him, "Are you sure that Raphael and Galbin are here to negotiate with you?" Prudence sneered. He didn't know Han Jean, but he knew Galbin. In the process of cooperation with the Beastmen, Galbin had always been a radical. Would he really negotiate with the Beastmen? What? Are you saying that Raphael and Galbin want to start a war? Lionel laughed loudly. You underestimate the power of the Beastmen too much. I still have more than 30 behemoths, more than 600 mountain giants, more than 3,000 shamans, more than 20,000 thunderbirds, and more than 100,000 elite warriors. How can they start a war? I just said that I know Raphael better than you. His original army was just Riptide, which was driven out of the Bite Man. Later, he occupied Black Raven City, but there was no way for him to expand there. Then, he occupied the Bite Man, but was driven out by you in just a few days. Now, he reluctantly took over Dismark's army. You elves have suffered heavy losses. Almost half of the elite archers of the Southern Forest Tribe and the Emerald Tribe have died. Wild Willow City is lucky. Even if they unite, can they really pose a threat to the Beastmen? Can they afford the losses? When the Southern Forest Tribe was mentioned, the muscles on Prudence's face twitched, but he didn't say anything. I admit that Raphael's strength is indeed very strong, and he has gathered some experts around him. But this is war. With just a few of them, my warriors are enough to drown them. So what if Solomon has more experts than Raphael? Rhinel said indifferently. Solomon has more experts than Raphael, but so what? We beastmen have never been afraid. I really want to know, how are you going to drown the god of war? Prudence said in a sarcastic tone. Also, are you really not afraid of Raphael? If you are really not afraid, then there is no need to talk nonsense with us. This was the essential difference between a warrior and a politician. Amtol had been trying to find the hope of survival, but Prudence had long been prepared to die. At first, he was willing to put down his weapons mainly because he had been bewitched by Amtol. He thought that Rinnell really had no evil intentions and would let them go. But after staying in Bite City for a few days, although he had been well received, Rinnell's attitude was extremely ambiguous. From Rinnell's eyes, Prudence could see a kind of contempt from his bones. At that time, he had made his final preparations. Rinnell looked at Prudence coldly. Prudence's words had hurt him and made him very angry. However, under his gaze, Prudence didn't show any fear. Instead, he looked back at him with the same cold eyes. Interesting. Rinnell also showed a sarcastic tone. You keep reminding me that Raphael is strong and terrifying, but why are you attacking Raphael's territory? Ha ha. If you had chosen to cooperate with Raphael from the beginning, no one in this area would have been able to defeat you. Amtol and Prudence's bodies trembled at the same time. No matter how bad the situation was, they had never shown a trace of regret. However, this was only to protect their self-esteem. Prudence was a little bit worse. He came from the southern forest and didn't understand the situation here. Amtol had long known about Han Jin, but he mistakenly thought that he was just a young man and didn't need to pay attention to him. Every time he was lonely, every time he woke up from a nightmare, Amtol would feel a heart-wrenching pain. If he had vigorously promoted the marriage between Han Jin and Sunir, how could he have fallen into this situation? He was the one who raised Sunir, so if Sunir wanted to repay his kindness, she would definitely do something for him. Han Jin liked Sunir, so of course, he would do his best to help the elves. With a little bit of manipulation, he could even turn Han Jin into a vanguard as hands, and the orcs would never have the chance to set foot on this land. Unfortunately, there is no medicine for regret in this world. One wrong step would lead to another wrong step. Rinnell saw Amtol's pain and Prudence's helplessness, and his heart was filled with joy. He then clapped his hands, and a series of heavy footsteps came from the outer hall. Then, a group of fully armed orc warriors poured into the hall and surrounded Amtol and Prudence. My two lords, don't waste your energy. Rinnell smiled. This will save you a lot of pain. Amtol's face became even more pale. In contrast, Prudence was much calmer. He slowly stood up from his seat. Rinnell, do you dare to accept my challenge? If you still think that you are a brave man, you want to have a duel with me? Rinnell was stunned. Humph. Prudence snorted coldly and looked at Rinnell quietly. Rhinelander rubbed his chin and pondered for a moment. Then he smiled and said, Okay, men, bring me Lord Prudence's longbow. This time, it was Prudence's turn to be stunned. He didn't expect Rinnell to agree to such a childish request. Soon, several orc warriors walked in. One of them was holding Prudence's longbow, and the other was holding 2 quivers full of arrows. They were indeed Prudence's weapons. Then, the orc warriors spread out in all directions, leaving enough space for them to fight. Prudence was overjoyed. He took a deep breath and grabbed the longbow with his trembling hands. Then, he hung the 2 quivers on his waist and walked to the middle of the field. He stared at Lionel. He was not in a hurry to make a move. Since Lionel had accepted his challenge so graciously, he had to show his graciousness as well, even though the field was very unfavorable for archers. I heard that you have activated God's mark a long time ago. Rinnell smiled. I have always wanted to see with my own eyes how powerful your arrows are. Rinnell, let the truth speak for itself, Prudence said calmly. The moment he received the longbow, his temperament had undergone an earth-shattering change. His devilishly handsome face was in high spirits, and his body was as straight as an arrow that had left the bowstring. As I said, I want to see the power of God's mark. Rinnell smiled. You may begin. His expression was very calm. and he didn't even bother to draw his scimitar. Prudence was furious. He couldn't stand Rinnel's underestimation of his combat ability, but it was also a good thing. He might be able to kill Rinnel on the spot. Even if he couldn't escape in the end, it would be worth it. Prudence didn't say anything more. His big, watery eyes narrowed into a line, shooting out a sharp light. He stared at Lionel. Then he raised his left hand, and an arrow appeared on the fingertips of his right hand. He drew the longbow with a fluid movement like moving clouds and flowing water. His momentum also increased with his movements. Every inch he drew the longbow, his momentum increased. When he drew the longbow into a full moon, his momentum also reached the peak. Suddenly, with a cracking sound, the longbow in Prudence's hand broke into two pieces. If Prudence was like a balloon just now, then what happened next was like a steel needle that mercilessly pierced the balloon. The heavy pressure in the hull disappeared in an instant, leaving only Prudence, who was dumbfounded, standing there with his mouth agape. Ha ha! Rinnel laughed so hard that he was rocking back and forth. He kept slapping the armrest with his hands. After a long while, he stopped laughing and said in a mischievous tone, "Lord Prudence, you are too strong." Prudence suddenly raised his head. "How are you going to fight me without a weapon?" Rinnel seemed to be in a difficult position. Then he pulled a scimitar from the waist of an orc warrior and threw it in front of Prudence. "You can only use this. Come." After that, Rinnel stood up with a smile, raised his fists, and shook them. "I don't use weapons." Chapter 413. Today was the day of the official negotiation. Rinnel was full of hope for the future. Bite City was originally the capital of the Orc Federation, so it was certainly more prosperous than Fado City. Moreover, he had given up Wild Willow City and used the elves as a shield to completely escape from the shadow of Grand Duke Solomon. Rinnel's mood was indescribable. He was extremely relaxed and happy. After a period of rest and recuperation, the strength of the orcs would become stronger and stronger. Rinnel was confident about this. However, what Rinnel was waiting for was not only Han Jin and Gao Bin, but also an endless army. The god of war was slowly flying forward in the air, followed by Lang Ning's Riptide, Alexander's Mountain Warrior Legion, Yelena's Magician Legion, Gavara's Holy Crown City Knight Legion, and Winston's First Swordsman Legion. Compared to the previous expedition, the Knights of Faith led by Amij were absent, but the Second Swordsman Legion led by Saxon was present. The military strength of the Holy Crown City could be considered to be in full force. From the perspective of war, this was normal. Han Jin's goal was to completely eradicate the orcs once and for all. Of course, he would use all his strength. However, the situation in the Holy Crown City was very tense, and the Holy See's attitude was aggressive. If Han Jin used all the military strength in the Holy Crown City at this time, the consequences would be unimaginable. Almost everyone could not understand. Gavara secretly guessed that Han Jin might have made such a wrong decision because he felt sorry for Jeds because of the Holy Crystal. However, Han Jin's attitude was very firm. Gavara tried to persuade him many times, but Han Jin was still stubborn. In fact, Han Jin was rarely so stubborn. In the past, he was very good at listening to others' opinions and even did not interfere with government or military affairs. He gave Gavara and the others absolute autonomy. Han Jin stood quietly at the bow. With Harley and Stilberg there, he did not need to control the god of war personally. Of course, if there was any danger, the magic array on the god of war would still be activated by him. Stilberg's strength was very weak. After all, he had not cultivated for a long time, and not everyone could be a genius. Harley was much stronger than Stilberg, but he was still not strong enough to activate the magic array on his own. Just now, they had occupied the North City of the Bite Man. There were not many orcs in the North City, and the god of war's nearly 600 magic crystal cannons had destroyed the defense of the North City in 2 rounds. Some orc soldiers quickly left the North City and retreated in the direction of Bite City. Han Jin did not send anyone to chase them. His plan was to drive all the orcs to Bite City, like driving ducks, and then launched the final battle with the elves. However, Rinnell had been kept in the dark all this time. When he was suddenly attacked, it was impossible for him to react immediately. First, he had to confirm the news, then accept it and admit that he had been deceived. Then, he had to prepare for the war, which would take at least 1 or 2 days. After receiving the report from the orc deserters that the North City had been captured by the soldiers of the Holy Crown City, Rinnell immediately slapped the table and stood up. "Raphael, how dare you deceive me?" Then, he immediately led his army to fight. This was not a war, but a child's play. When Han Jin was about to launch the first attack, Lang Ning led the Riptide out of the Holy Crown City in the early morning. When Cain led the Magic Legion out of the Holy Crown City, it was already noon. This was enough to prove how complicated the war was. Moreover, Rinnell had great fantasies about Han Jin. Under such a huge contrast and intense psychological conflict, it would take him a long time to calm down, accept the reality, and make the right decision. However, Han Jin only needed 2 days. Now, they were going to attack the east city of the Bite Man. Gao Bin would lead the elf army to attack the west city of the Bite Man first, and then take the south city. The two sides would meet in the southeast city of Bite City. According to the current marching speed, they would arrive in the east city by noon tomorrow. After occupying the east city, the god of war would immediately leave the army and enter Bite City first. By using the powerful attack of the god of war, the main force of the orcs would be restrained and the two sides could meet smoothly. No one could underestimate the attack power of 600 magic crystal cannons. Moreover, the god of war had always been the gathering place of the powerful forces in the Holy Crown City. No matter the former or the latter, it was enough to make Rinnell feel a great threat. Guevara walked slowly to Han Jin and said lightly, "Those little guys are worried about the future of the Holy Crown City. You really don't want to say anything? At the very least, you should comfort them." "Comfort?" Han Jin smiled. "It's not necessary. And for me, the more worried they are, the better it is for me." Guevara was stunned. He didn't understand what Han Jin meant, but he seemed to have caught something important. After a moment of silence, he said, "Raphael, there are a few words I should say to you." "Go ahead." Han Jin said softly. "I used to think that my life was over. Who would have thought that I would meet you in the end?" A faint smile appeared on Guevara's face. "If one day you become as old as I am now, you will understand that the heart will eventually get tired of it, just like a pile of ashes. Enough, really enough. Enough friends, enough enemies, enough everything. I can understand you." Han Jin nodded slowly. "But I don't know why, when I see you guys growing up little by little, I have a new passion." Guevara said in a low voice, "I treat this place as my own home and you guys as my own children. So, I started to work hard again, at least until you guys are fully mature." "I know." Han Jin's tone also became low. He had clearly seen Guevara's efforts. He had come up with a plan, traveled here and there, and even personally came to isolated Cliff City to talk to Housen, the president of the Chamber of Commerce. He had sold his old face in order to gain the support of the Chamber of Commerce. Not to mention the role Han Jin had played in all of this, no one could deny Guevara's efforts. He had been trying his best to protect these young people. In fact, everyone saw it and remembered it in their hearts. It was also for this reason that Guevara was the only one who was qualified to take advantage of his seniority. No matter who he scolded, even Han Jin himself, they could only listen obediently. "It's just that I didn't expect." Guevara paused and sighed. This day would come so soon. Han Jin froze for a moment and then smiled bitterly. The older the ginger, the spicier it was. This saying was true. Guevara's words were too poisonous. He had been trying his best to support these young people until they were fully mature. Now, he admitted that he had achieved his goal. Furthermore, if Han Jin could talk about this matter and discuss it with Guevara, it would prove that Han Jin was not mature enough and still needed Guevara's protection. If Han Jin insisted on not talking about it, it would prove that Guevara was no longer necessary. "Do you really want to hurt the passion of an old man? Raphael, Everyone is working hard for our future, including Morrison's and the others. It's just that because of their strength, they can't find a place to express themselves. In their hearts, they are very sad. Guevara slowly continued. This is no longer your home alone. It's everyone's home. Everyone's future is in your hands. When you make a decision, shouldn't you discuss it with others? I know that you are worried that Morrison's, Sassu, and the other idiots will reveal flaws and arouse Adolf's suspicion. But is everyone here an idiot? Guevara's eyes flashed. His meaning was obvious. Am I an idiot too? Hanjin's expression was somewhat awkward. He was ready to surrender. Also, you have never considered Hallister's situation. Being able to step on the god of war means that he has gained everyone's trust, Guevara said. Hallister is our friend. There are already people guessing behind your back that you might have given up on Hallister. Do you know what they will think? To put it bluntly, if you can give up on Hallister today, you will give up on one of them tomorrow. I will never give up on anyone, Hanjin said helplessly. Most of the lords liked to act arbitrarily. This way, they could firmly control the highest authority, but it also had an obvious weakness. They could not retain true talents unless they were far superior to tens of thousands of others. It was undeniable that they were always submissive, and most of them were mediocre. Maintaining one's own unique style was the basic requirement to become talent. The two lords, Dismark and Zagund, were the best examples. They lacked true experts under their command. Gerald was just a weapon without his own thoughts. Hazel's heart had long since died. He lacked the will to fight and improve. Therefore, when Dismark and Zagund died, the forces under their command immediately collapsed. This was also inevitable. They could not break through the final barrier, so they could only choose to kill any hope that could challenge them in order to maintain their absolute position. If Guevara was an outsider and went to seek refuge with Dismark or Zagund, would they trust him? Impossible. This was because Guevara was a direct threat to them. Only Hanjin would not focus on fighting for power. He would only train hard. The former was trying to weaken the threat as much as possible, while Hanjin was trying to make himself stronger. Although their desires were somewhat similar, the results were completely different. Nicholas could not tolerate Jedis, so Jedis came. Chasam could not tolerate Dominique, so Dominique came. At this moment, Hanjin also understood where the problem was. Guevara was definitely not a submissive, mediocre person. When he first plotted against Dragon City and Dragon Realm, he hid it from Guevara because he was worried that Guevara would stop him. After all, the first step of the plan was to attack the Holy See. However, this time, he continued to keep his secret. It was inevitable that Guevara would feel uncomfortable. Are you really not worried about Hallister? Guevara asked. Suffering is inevitable. When I see Hallister, I will apologize to him. What if Adolf kills Hallister? Impossible. Although Adolf is an extreme believer, he should have a mind of his own. Otherwise, the previous generation of monks would not have chosen him. Hanjin said slowly, if they fall out with me, it will not benefit the Holy See. The Holy See will suffer a devastating blow. They need me far more than I need them. You know that the Holy See is not going to survive? Then why did you? Guevara shook his head. In fact, he also knew that Adolf would not be so ruthless. This was just an entry point for them to have a deeper conversation. They will get enough benefits. At least, I will satisfy Jedis. Hanjin said. Obtaining the Saint Crystal was definitely a milestone in his journey. Even if he could go back in time, he would still fight for it. But we do not know how they will deal with Hallister. I am worried that. Guevara paused. If Hallister does not hold on and confesses to you, then there will be no turning back. That's impossible. I believe Hallister. I've heard Chipango talk about his past. He might look like a playboy, but he's actually a very strong man. Hanjin smiled. Moreover, he should know that if he really confesses, he will definitely be killed. What? Guevara was stunned. Is the Holy See ready to completely fall out with me? Hanjin smiled. If Adolf knows about this, he will do everything he can to cover up all traces. He must not alert me. You know Adolf very well. Not really. When I first found out that the Holy See had arrested Hallister, I was very angry and nervous. But later I thought it through. Han Jin smiled. It is actually very simple. What does Adolf want? To completely fall out with us, or to continue supporting each other? Before the Holy See grows stronger, they can only choose the latter. But it seems like you are not the only choice, Guevara said. Yes, they do have other choices. Han Jin paused for a moment. Chaesam is a Thunder Titan and will not believe in his teachings, so he can be excluded. The elves believe in the goddess of nature, so they can also be excluded. Grand Duke Solomon of the capital of elements? Don't forget my relationship with Yelena. If they fall out with me, will they be able to get Solomon's support? There's also Malishan from Depew City. Although Depew City is a human city, it's still being suppressed by Chaesam. If there's no outside interference, Malishan will only be able to last 2 or 3 years at most. He's definitely no match for Chaesam. So Malishan will value the Holy See more than you and is more suitable for the Alliance. If the Holy See chooses Malishan, then it means that they have already fallen out with us. Then what about us? Won't we take revenge? The North has to fight against Chaesam and be wary of us and the elves. Does the Holy See think they have the strength to do so? Also, Jed's is very clear that after eliminating the orcs, my attention will inevitably shift to the north. Do they really want to be an obstacle? Han Jin said slowly. After thinking about it, they can only choose to cooperate with us. If they choose to do anything else, it will be suicide. We know this, but does Adolf know? Guevara sighed. Looking at his actions, I feel that he is a very tough and stubborn person. If he doesn't even know this, then he is a fool. Han Jin said, Grand Duke Solomon mentioned to me that he had met Adolf by chance and received some revelations from him. If Adolf is really a stubborn person, then what revelations can he receive? Have you thought about Jed's feelings? Guevara changed his perspective. If he knew the truth, what would he think? This is another thing that makes me helpless. Han Jin pondered for a moment. Let time make up for it. Can time really make up for everything? This time, Han Jin was stumped by the question and was speechless for a long time. Forget it. Let's not talk about this. Guevara said, let's talk about what you want to do. Guevara looked back as he spoke, focusing on observing Dominique. The Thunder Titan's hearing was terrifying. Although they were standing at the bow of the ship and away from the crowd, they still had to be careful. Adolf did this just to fight for more power for the Holy See. Because I have repeatedly limited the Holy See's development in terms of the size of the parish and the number of believers, the bishops who are dissatisfied with me should have reported this to Adolf. I guess their next step is for us to return to the Holy Crown City and find a suitable person to remind me of how powerful the ascetics are. Han Jin paused. As for the Holy Crystal, if they were really sure that the Holy Crystal was stolen by me, the matter would not be so serious. How to numb the enemy is basic knowledge. Even if Adolf did not think of it, Jed's, Adonis, and Amij would have tried their best to remind Adolf. Have you already regarded Jed's as an enemy? Guevara frowned. No, at least not now. I know what you mean, Guevara sighed again. Guevara sighed again. He was once a trustworthy friend, but now he was in such a situation. If they knew it was you, they wouldn't have touched Hallister. So they put pressure on you, and at the same time, they wanted to find out if it had anything to do with us. After all, it was too much of a coincidence. Just when Hallister invited the sorcerers over, the giant dragon of Dragon City broke into the Holy Crown City. Yes, Han Jin nodded. Suspicion and confirmation are two different things. The former means that there is still room for negotiation, while the latter means that no matter what we do, they will still regard us as an enemy. Go on, Guevara said. A traveler strolling in the dark felt the cold was unbearable, so he started a bonfire in the forest to warm himself up. However, he knew that someone who didn't like fire would come and put out his bonfire. Han Jin said, Adolf is that traveler. He should have prepared himself and will not allow me to extinguish his hope. If we want him to bow down or stand on my side, there's only one way left. Instead of putting out the fire, we have to find a way to make the fire bigger. If it gets out of control, it might even burn down the whole forest. At that time, we don't even need to say anything. He will be scared. You mean? Guevara looked into Han Jin's eyes. He understood what Han Jin was trying to say. We are worried about falling out with the Holy See. But how can they not be worried? Han Jin smiled. A tough attitude? Haha, that is just a way to force us to give in. If they dare to do so, it means that they believe in our rationality and the basis of cooperation. Chapter 414. Rhine stood like a statue at the top of the city wall, looking into the distance. On the distant horizon, there was a small black dot floating leisurely in the air. He knew that it was Han Jin's god of war. When he first received the news that the North City had fallen, Rhine did not believe it at all. He thought that the unruly Beastman warriors had done something that angered Han Jin, causing him to scold the Beastman who had reported the news. However, he immediately received news that the West City had been occupied by the elves. There was no need to investigate anymore. Rhine completely understood that everything was Han Jin's scheme. The anger and disappointment in his heart could not be described with words. However, this was far from enough to defeat him. Rhine, you want war? Fine, then I will show you what true bravery is. Behind Rhine stood dozens of Beastman generals. Their faces were very serious, and no one dared to speak carelessly. This was because Rhine had always preached that peace was imminent. They all knew that Rhine must have secretly reached an agreement with that human lord. Now, reality was telling them that Rhine had been deceived, and he had been deceived very miserably. As for what they thought in their hearts, that was their own business. However, they had to maintain their silence on the surface. They could not afford to anger Rhine. The current Rhine was like a barrel of gunpowder, and the slightest spark would cause it to explode. Among them, there was an old beast man who was particularly eye-catching. He had a pair of extremely long fangs that protruded from the corners of his lips, drawing a perfect arc. The tips of his fangs were curved inwards, almost reaching his eyelids. Fangs were nothing special, but such long fangs were very rare. Almost everyone who saw him would be curious. What would happen in a few years? Would his eyes be pierced by his own fangs? King, this is our last chance, the old beast man said slowly. The old beast man said slowly, give me 20 behemoths, 1,000 shamans, and give me 3 days. I have enough confidence to completely destroy the elven army. Here, we only need to hold on for 3 days. Rhinelander slowly turned his head, and his gaze fell on the old orc, but he didn't say anything. After looking at each other for a moment, he turned his head back. The old beast man sighed helplessly. He knew that his situation was a bit special, and he had to take away half of the beastman's high-end fighting force. It was inevitable that Rinnell would be suspicious, but in the current situation, he couldn't make any mistakes. Only by having enough troops in his hands could he fulfill his promise. Toby, you're needed here. Rinnell finally spoke. The old orc named Toby smiled bitterly. It had not been long since Lionel had replaced Forza, so his power was still unstable. This was the main reason why he had summoned almost all the orc troops to Bite City. It was beneficial for reshuffling. In the current situation, it was impossible for him to hand over the army that he had painstakingly controlled to others. Moreover, several orc generals proposed a retreat. They wanted to take advantage of the fact that the human army and the elven army hadn't joined up yet. They wanted to rush out from the southeast, pass through the territory of the Holy Crown City, and continue to the south. Of course, if there was a chance, they didn't mind destroying the Holy Crown City. However, this suggestion was also rejected by Lionel. He had trusted Raphael so much, yet he had been mercilessly fooled. He was not willing to be a deserter at the start of the war. He had to fight to vent the anger in his heart. When Rinnell was looking at the god of war, Han Jin was also looking at Bite City. Han Jin and the others looked as leisurely as Han Jin, as if they didn't realize that there were hundreds of thousands of orcs eyeing the city in front of them covetously. Everyone had experienced the extreme speed of the god of war, and witnessed the scene of 600 magic crystal cannons firing at the same time. Except for a group of giant dragons, there seemed to be nothing in this world that could threaten the god of war. Moreover, the powerhouses on the god of war could also release their great fighting strength, especially Hanjin. Even if a giant dragon came, it wouldn't be able to do anything to them. "I made a mistake," Hanjin suddenly said. "What mistake?" Guevara was stunned. He suddenly thought of Adolf and Jedis. Was it the Holy Crown City? Everyone's eyes focused on Hanjin. "Do you still remember Cortini?" Hanjin said slowly. "Of course, what happened to him?" Guevara asked. "I underestimated the purple flower." Hanjin shrugged his shoulders. "The purple flower is a pawn sent by the Abyss Demon Donald. They can be eyes and ears and report everything they see and hear to the Abyss world. Zagund is Donald's test subject. How could there not be people from the purple flower monitoring Zagund?" "What do you mean?" Guevara was a little surprised. He knew that Hanjin trusted Cortini very much and had given him some important things to deal with. Only the people from the purple flower know the importance of Qi Li. This is related to the whereabouts of the light battle robe. Hanjin narrowed his eyes. "When I went out for the first time, I asked Cortini to take his people to find Qi Li. I also told him the characteristics of Qi Li and Sylvia, but he couldn't find Qi Li. Now, Qi Li and Sylvia were chased all the way back to the Holy Crown City with the help of Adolf. I feel that there is some connection between them." "You mean there are people from the purple flower among Cortini's people? Or is he the leader of the purple flower?" Guevara asked. "You should be fine. I can see his feelings for Zagund." Hanjin pondered for a moment, but it's hard to say about his people. "I suspect some of them had already found out about Qi Li, but didn't tell Cortini. A few days ago, I talked to Gao Bin and Lydia in detail. After the elves occupied Black Raven City, they didn't find anything special. This proves that Qi Li and Sylvia hid themselves very well. But they were chased after maybe I brought trouble to them. I admit that what you said is very reasonable. Zagund must be the target of the purple flower surveillance." Guevara's sight turned to the back of Hanjin and smiled bitterly. "But we are now facing the threat of hundreds of thousands of orcs. Can you focus your attention?" "Raphael, look!" Morrison's university shouted. Hanjin was also looking, but what he was looking at was behind Guevara. A group of small black dots had appeared in the sky and were closing in on the god of war at an extremely fast speed. When Hanjin looked around, there were countless black dots everywhere, covering the sky and the sun. They were boundless and were closing in from all directions. "Thunderbirds! It's the Thunderbirds!" Hogan screamed. "So many! Maybe there are tens of thousands of them." A clear chirp sounded from the side of the ship. Little Gold Lightning spread his wings and was about to lead his companions out to fight. It turned out that the most reckless on the god of war wasn't Morrison's, but Little Gold Lightning. Not to mention tens of thousands of Thunderbirds. Even if there were millions of them, Little Gold Lightning's answer would probably be only one word. "Charge! You better behave!" Hanjin shouted. Little Gold Lightning's momentum suddenly became weak. He slowly closed his wings and looked at Hanjin dejectedly. "Lionel is really going all out." Hanjin sneered. "Let's go." To a real expert, the attack power of a single Thunderbird was insignificant. But if tens of thousands of Thunderbirds released lightning at the same time, even Guevara might be killed on the spot. This was not a joke. Ga. Harley laughed sinisterly and controlled the god of war to rise into the sky. The god of war moved at full speed. Although its speed was not as fast as a giant dragon, it was definitely faster than the Thunderbirds. The siege of the orcs did not affect the god of war at all. 100 meters, 200 meters. The god of war rose higher and higher. The Thunderbirds could not fly higher than 2,000 meters, but the god of war did not have such concerns. Everyone's expression was still very calm. Obviously, they had enough confidence in Hanjin and the god of war. Suddenly, a group of Thunderbirds dove down from the clouds, forming a gigantic golden cloud that covered the god of war. "We were careless." Guevara frowned. They did not sense the Thunderbirds approaching, which proved that these Thunderbirds had been controlling the airspace at their maximum altitude. When their companions attacked, they quickly lowered their altitude and blocked the God of War's escape route. "Charge out!" Han Jin shouted. Dominique stood up silently, walked to the middle of the deck, and looked up at the sky. Yelena first blessed herself with a magic shield, then took out the golden melon hammer, and Guevara also pulled out his dragon spear. Dominique was a thunder titan, Yelena mastered thunder magic, and Guevara's fighting technique was the thunder fighting technique. Among all the masters, only the three of them had the strongest resistance to thunder magic. If a battle really broke out, of course they would be at the forefront. Leslie and Lorraine showed an excited look. They came to the Holy Crown City from thousands of miles away, not for sightseeing or love, but to broaden their knowledge and improve their strength. These days, they had been bored out of their minds, and now they could finally witness a fierce battle. Suddenly, a dazzling light burst out between heaven and earth, and bolts of lightning shot down. The magic array set by Yelena had already been activated, but under the attack of thousands of lightning bolts, her efforts were futile. The light curtain of the magic array twisted violently, like soap bubbles in the wind. Even a layman like Han Jin could see that the magic array could not withstand the same attack. "Raphael," Yelena shouted. She was reminding Han Jin. Han Jin stretched out his hand, and Harley's body instantly turned into a dark bead. Then, Han Jin sat in Harley's position. Everyone was relieved. Although Han Jin did not do anything, they had a feeling that as long as Han Jin was there, there would be no problem. Of course, the Thunderbirds would not give the enemy a chance to breathe. Dense bolts of lightning fell again like raindrops. Han Jin raised his eyebrows and shouted, "5 elements rotation, open." Suddenly, an illusion appeared in front of everyone's eyes. The entire war god had turned into a giant mountain. Compared to the usual mountain peaks, there was no grass, no trees, and of course, no streams. There were only pieces of bare rock, and they were in the middle of the giant mountain peak. Bolts of lightning struck down, sending gravel flying everywhere. Countless deep and shallow cracks appeared on the rock stratum, but in the next moment, they could clearly see that the cracks were healing. "What kind of magic is this?" Yelena was stunned. The giant mountain was not real. Of course, they knew that it was an illusion, but did illusions have defensive power? Leslie and Lorraine were even more excited and almost clapped their hands to congratulate them. This time, they did not come in vain. Lionel, who was far away, also took a deep breath. Because of the distance, in his eyes, the illusion became very realistic. The god of war had disappeared, and what appeared in the sky was a giant mountain. Even in the age of gods, this kind of magic had never appeared. The Thunderbirds once again released their lightning bolts. The distance between the two sides was getting closer and closer. The attacks of the Thunderbirds were even more ferocious than before. The cracks on the mountain were also deeper and longer than before. Some of the lightning bolts turned into electric arcs and traveled along the cracks to the god of war. They rippled across the deck and disappeared without a trace. Han Jin was suddenly stunned, as if there was something that he could not believe. Then he shouted, "All of you get down? Get down!" Guevara, Yelena, and the others looked at each other, not knowing what had happened to Han Jin. "Get down quickly!" Han Jin shouted again. "Let's go!" Guevara was the first to speak. He looked at Han Jin with a worried gaze, then strode towards the stairs. Han Jin spoke in such a tone. Was it really dangerous? "Raphael." Yelena did not want to leave. "Let's go." Han Jin looked very anxious. Yelena stomped her feet angrily, turned around, and followed everyone to the stairs. Leslie and Lorraine did not want to leave either, but since Yelena had already left, they could not stay to see what was going on. Soon, everyone left the deck, except for Dominique, who was still looking up at the sky. Dominique rolled her eyes at Han Jin and ignored Han Jin. Han Jin was stunned and realized that Dominique wanted to go down. She must have wanted to go down a long time ago, but could she? Otherwise, why would she stay on the deck all day? But with Dominique around, he could not act according to his inspiration. What if Dominique got hurt? You don't have to worry about me, Dominique said faintly. My resistance to electricity is much stronger than you think, Dominique said calmly. Okay. Han Jin could only make up his mind. Then, he reluctantly turned his gaze and observed the approaching thunderbirds. The giant mountain became dim. Under the constant attack of lightning, more and more electric arcs rushed to the deck. Han Jin waved his hand, and a rich purple light flashed, then turned into a river of stars and wrapped around the god of war. His heavenly Tao was refined from the heavenly tribulation, so it had a strong resistance to lightning. It was better to be safe than sorry. Although the sudden inspiration made him excited, it was better to be safe than sorry. In the distance, Reynolds suddenly laughed. The giant mountain had become blurry, and the outline of the god of war was faintly visible. He turned to the orc generals and said, "Do you see that? They can't hold on any longer. What kind of magic is that?" Old Orc Toby looked very serious. In my memory, there has never been such a type of magic. It doesn't matter what kind of magic it is. Reynolds smiled. The important thing is that they can't hold on any longer. Haha, Raphael, this is what you deserve. King, do you really think that the Thunderbirds can defeat Raphael? The smile on Reynolds' face disappeared, and he glanced at Toby angrily. At least, he has tasted our power. Old Orc Toby was silent. Reynolds was definitely not like this in the past. The biggest difference between him and Forza was that he could keep a low profile and was good at listening to others' opinions. Why had he become like this now? He had just tasted the taste of power, and he had already lost himself in it. Not only Reynolds, but even Dominguez thought that Han Jin must be in danger. When she looked at Han Jin again, she found that there were two hot flames burning in Han Jin's eyes, and Han Jin was smiling so happily. Even when she broke through the bottleneck and became the Thunder Titan, her smile would not be as bright as Han Jin's. There was a trace of madness in that smile. The Thunderbirds caught Han Jin and immediately focused their attacks on Han Jin. As the protection of the five elements was deliberately weakened, more and more lightning penetrated the mountain and hit Han Jin. At this moment, Han Jin was like the god of thunder descending to the mortal world. His whole body was wrapped in lightning, and even Dominguez, who was more than 10 meters away, could not see Han Jin's figure. In order to minimize the chaos, Hogan had asked all the sorcerers and mountain warriors to return to their collective dormitories. Guevara, Major Domo Gale, and the others were still gathered in the corridor, waiting quietly. They were worried about Han Jin, but they did not want to disturb Han Jin. They were very conflicted. The exit of the deck was right in front of them, so if they were needed, they could rush to the deck as fast as possible. Boom, boom, boom. The roars of the lightning were like the most intense drum beats, almost as if they were connected together, like the roars of a giant god. Suddenly, they felt a kind of feeling in their hearts that the roaring tide of lightning elements was gathering in a certain place, and this feeling was getting stronger and stronger. Yelena came back to her senses and slowly walked to the stairs. Yelena, where are you going? Guevara asked hurriedly. He was worried that Yelena would rush outside and cause trouble for Han Jin. Back to my room. Yelena forced a smile and walked down the stairs. Seeing Yelena walking down, Guevara was relieved. He then focused his attention and carefully listened to the movements outside. Yelena was very nervous. The magic circle set up by Han Jin was very magical. There were so many electric elements in a magic laboratory, but Han Jin's magic circle could block all the elemental fluctuations. As long as she walked out of the laboratory, she would not be able to sense anything, and no one would be able to sense anything. But now, Han Jin's magic circle was gradually losing its shielding effect. What was going on? Yelena walked into the corridor and looked around to make sure there was no one around. She gritted her teeth and rushed to the wall. The next moment, she disappeared without a trace. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.